A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. In a world that sometimes feels strained by the clamor of differing tongues, I found myself at the center of a linguistic tug-of-war with my husband, Tom. I've always had a deep passion for the German language. It had been a part of my life since I was a child, nurtured by bedtime stories my grandmother would tell me in her lilting accent. When Tom and I met in college, I was amazed at how he soaked in those stories too, admiring my enthusiasm for a culture that seemed so distant to him, an American born and bred. Over the years, that admiration blossomed into love, but in the intimacy of our shared life, our once attractive differences began to fray at the edges. Tom studied German diligently for a while but soon found the nuances overwhelming, preferring to converse in the simple, comforting rhythms of English. But I loved to practice my German, and as the months slipped into years, it became my default language, a habitual comfort zone that I didn't realize was isolating him. One quiet evening after dinner, the familiar dance of our conversation took an unexpected turn when he asked me, gently but firmly, if I could refrain from speaking German at home as it sometimes made him feel excluded. The request struck me deeply. It felt like a rejection of a part of who I was, yet his eyes had that vulnerable glint that said he was struggling with his own feelings too. I was torn. Should I honor his request, sacrificing my linguistic flair for the sake of his comfort, or could I, in good conscience, continue speaking German, even if it meant detracting from our shared space? My thoughts churned that night, the shadows of self-doubt creeping in, mimicking our sad quiet as we ended the day. Was I the asshole for wanting to indulge in something that was such a part of me, or was I merely turning my back on a plea from the heart? Days turned into a strange dance of half-phrases in English and attempts at German that felt like a betrayal to the warmth and fluidity I thrived in. I saw flashes of disappointment in Tom's eyes each time I caught myself slipping back into my cherished words. It was an unnerving cycle. Each apology towards him felt like another nail in my own heart. The bright candlelight of our evenings dimmed, booths in our favorite restaurants filled with the silence of unspoken grievances. It wasn't until a particularly stormy night that we truly cracked open the chasm between us. Sitting in our living room, rain like a relentless drum on the roof, I finally laid bare my emotions. I told him how important it was for me to retain that part of my personality, that it felt as intrinsic to my being as breathing. And there in that cozy, rain-soaked space, our hearts opened wide, he admitted that while he loved me and admired my passion, he sometimes felt like he was on the outside looking in. It was a powerful exchange, raw and painful, but it was illuminated by an understanding that only deepened our bond. We spoke until the rain slowed, weaving through layers of our emotions, fears, and desires. By the end, we found a middle ground. We agreed that I could speak German during specific times, perhaps in moments of playfulness or passion, while committing to using English for our everyday conversations. It was a compromise born out of respect and love, a promise to nurture both my passion and his feelings. Months later, wrapped in the warmth of our love and mutual respect, I found joy in the sounds of both languages echoing through our home. I realized that love, like language, is best expressed in fluidity and understanding. We created our own little world, embracing a balance that felt harmonious, a beautiful cacophony of English conversations sprinkled with delightful German whispers. Sometimes, in those quiet moments, I catch Tom grinning when I slip into German to narrate a mundane event. It's a reassuring reminder that rather than diminishing our connection, my passion is woven seamlessly into our shared rhythm. It brings us closer, sparking late-night discussions about culture and identity, far more intimate than a mere exchange of words. As for my own internal conflict, it reshaped me into a partner who learned the beauty of compromise, whose heart echoes with gratitude for the understanding we carved from our differences. And on particularly slow afternoons, we sometimes find ourselves curled up with a book of German fairy tales, and for just a moment, the language that brought me to life becomes a bridge we walk hand in hand upon. However, our peaceful coexistence faced an unexpected challenge that I hadn't seen coming, and it started rather innocuously, with a flurry of messages from a close friend who was traveling to Germany. She was sending me pictures of charming villages, bustling markets, and the kind of enchanting landscapes that always called to my adventurous spirit. Each image ignited a longing within me, stirring the remnants of my passion for the language and culture as if I were being beckoned back to my roots. I found myself daydreaming about walking among the timber-framed houses of Rothenburg ob der Tauber, sipping coffee in a quaint cafe while laboriously picking apart the intricacies of my beloved language. With each ecstatic message I shared with my husband, Oliver, I ventured deeper into my reminiscing. But then a thought began to fester like a shadow in the back of my mind, I was slipping away from our shared language, and would that not create a rift again? In a moment that felt like a culmination of tension, I set my phone down and took a deep breath, deciding to tell him. One evening, while we prepared dinner, I casually mentioned how much I missed speaking German fluently. As I said those words, I felt the sparks that often flew between us dim just slightly. He cleared his throat, his back turned to me as the garlic sizzled in the pan. "You know it's hard for me when you speak that way," he replied softly, the uncharacteristic strain in his voice tinging my excitement with remorse. I felt the warmth of the kitchen wrap around us, but a chill crept into my heart. I could see where this was headed. I was about to dance on the edges of our previous discussions, tiptoeing around old insecurities. My mind raced as I weighed the prospect of expressing my desire against the well-worn caution of his sensitivity toward my enthusiasm. In his eyes, my love for the language sometimes felt like a conflation of identities, a risk that threatened to dilute the bond we had carefully rebuilt. It was never that he didn't appreciate the beauty of it, he just felt far removed from it, as if it were a melodious tune he couldn't fully hear. I offered a kind smile and said, "How about we practice together? Just a little? It might help us connect even more." For a moment, his shoulders dropped as if a weight had been lifted, and then that familiar tension began to creep back. "I don't want to feel left out," he said, a hint of defeat in his voice. It cut deep. I had unknowingly placed him into a familiar corner, a place that meant both of us retreading an old, risky narrative. Yet, this time, I saw an opportunity. Instead of focusing on our differences, I could bring him into my passion rather than pushing him away from it. I let silence envelop us, letting his thoughts swirl in the still air of the kitchen, and when it felt right, I proposed a solution. What if I spoke as fluently as I wanted, but also shared the meaning? I could help bridge the language too, like I did before. We could find a balance. Slowly, I watched as his frown morphed into thoughtfulness. "You truly want to bring me with you, don't you?" he asked with a cautious smile. "I do," I affirmed, the sincerity ringing in my heart, resonating through the air like the faint echo of a bell. Over the next few months, we began a new chapter together, one marked by our evenings spent in our cozy living room, dictionaries and notes sprawled around us, laughter punctuating the soft hum of our conversations. I shared with Oliver the stories behind the words, the richness of expressions and idioms that had once captivated me. I watched as his eyes lit up when unraveling the humor of a joke in German or realizing the affection imbued in a simple phrase. We even began to weave our private language, a blend of English and German that was uniquely ours. But with each passing week, our discussions deepened. The language, once a bridge and then a wall, transformed into a tapestry that enveloped us in colors of understanding. We talked about identity, culture, and our values, each thread strengthening the bond we had constructed over our differences. We shared our fears, Oliver expressing the insecurities of feeling linguistically inadequate, while I confessed my worries of losing touch with my heritage. And in those moments, the air filled with a shared understanding that surpassed words. Months later, as I nestled into the warmth of our oversized couch one rainy evening, surrounded by books and a steaming cup of herbal tea, it struck me how beautifully we had rebuilt our connection. The gray clouds draped outside, yet inside, it felt eternally sunlit with warmth and understanding. With my skin tingling from the memories of our journey, I decided to share our progress in a post on a Reddit community that focused on relationships. I titled my thread "A myth asshole wibta if I only spoke German to my husband despite him requesting I don't?" But as I typed, it felt less like a plea for validation and more a celebration of a love that had transcended language barriers. Lastly, I fondly recounted our journey, the blending of cultures, how we found our rhythm again, and I concluded with a question to the community: have you found harmony in your differences? As I posted it, a sense of relief washed over me. I had made it through a tumultuous chapter, and now we stood, hand in hand, ready to explore the landscapes of our vibrant, shared life together. Soon after, I received a wave of supportive and insightful replies, many expressing similar experiences, which encouraged me further. Later that night, as I drifted off to sleep, I looked over at Oliver, his peaceful face illuminated by the moonlight streaming through our window. I realized anew that love, much like language, is a journey, not a destination. Each step we took together unveiled not just the beauty in our differences, but also the harmony that lay within, patiently waiting to be discovered. As the soft glow of dawn began to fill our bedroom, I stirred awake to find Oliver already up, immersed in his morning ritual of brewing coffee. The rich aroma seeped through the air, weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts. I watched him from the comfort of our rumpled bed, the way the sun kissed his tousled hair, and felt a swell of affection. This was our life, a gentle dance of routine and spontaneity. But underneath the surface, excitement tinged with a sense of trepidation lingered. Today marked the beginning of my exploration into joining a local German conversation group. After my post online, a number of people had urged me to enhance my language skills further, not just for my own fulfillment but for the bridge it could build between Oliver and me. I knew he wanted me to improve my English as well, and while he supported my passion, there was still a mutual understanding hovering between us that needed to be navigated carefully. The group met in a cozy cafe downtown, where laughter mingled with the sounds of clinking cups and the soft whir of the espresso machine. As I stepped inside, the chatter seemed to swallow me whole. I spotted a table filled with fellow language adventurers, each with a story and a shared commitment to embracing a new tongue. With a nervous smile, I slid into an empty chair, the warmth of the gathering slowly enveloping me. Conversations took flight as we practiced phrases, stuttered over difficult pronunciations, and stumbled through the occasional awkward silence, laughter breaking the tension. I felt a spark of something familiar igniting within me, an eagerness to embrace the nuances. It was exhilarating, yet I couldn't shake the thought of Oliver, wondering if he would feel left out or if he was simply letting me fly on this new adventure. That evening, as we settled back into our routine, I couldn't help but share my excitement with Oliver. His face lit up with a genuine smile, yet beneath the enthusiasm, I sensed a flicker of apprehension. "It sounds amazing, actually," he said, pausing as if weighing his words carefully. "But promise me you'll still speak with me in English when we're home. I want you to feel free to express yourself with me fully." His earnest gaze met mine, sincerity draping each syllable in warmth. As I nodded, I could feel the weight of our unspoken understanding, a desire to balance my passion with the importance of our connection. However, the next few days were an exercise in self-discipline and compromise. I found myself wanting to slip into German more often, the phrases just at the tip of my tongue, eager to dance into the spaces we shared. But in doing so, I sometimes caught a glimpse of Oliver's discomfort, the furrowed brow when he couldn't follow my excitement, the brief silence when I spoke a sentence too rapid in my newfound confidence. This tug of war between my zeal and his request started to weigh on my heart. Were the walls I erected to protect my love inadvertently turning impenetrable? After a particularly frustrating attempt at explaining a simple story in German to him, resulting in more confusion than connection, I felt a rush of guilt clawing at my insides. I walked to the window, looking out at the twilight blending into night, the world outside a tapestry of muted colors. It struck me then how language, glorious as it could be, was a tool meant for connection, not division. Perhaps I had let my excitement overshadow the core of our relationship, and a wave of remorse flooded over me as I thought of our conversations where he patiently navigated between my two languages. That night, I made a decision. I turned to Oliver, who was curled up with a book of his own, and took a deep breath. "How about we create space for both?" I suggested softly, and he glanced up, surprise flickering across his features. "Let's set aside specific times for German. And when you're tired or lost, I'll be right here, ready to help you navigate back to English. Let's learn together." His eyes shone with a mix of understanding and relief as a smile broke across his face. In the following weeks, we embraced this newfound rhythm. Each night, we dipped into German for a little while, navigating through stories, fairy tales we both loved, or snippets from the news that intrigued us. When the words stumbled, we laughed until our stomachs hurt, and I cherished the look in his eyes as they sparkled with shared discovery and patience. Our evenings were filled with light-hearted attempts at pronunciation, playful teasing when one of us would mix up words, and the comforting realization that no matter the language, love threaded itself seamlessly between us. As I lay in bed amidst the whispers of night, I smiled, feeling a warmth blanket around my heart. I had aimed for fluency, but what I had found was something richer, an intimacy forged through compassion and understanding. Each mistake became a stepping stone, revealing the path that lay not just to understanding German, but deeper connections that breathed life into our relationship. The journey of language became a metaphor for our love story, filled with missteps yet painted with the beauty of growth, both together and individually. And as I reached for Oliver's hand, I realized that love, like language, was a living, breathing entity, forever expanding, ever changing, but always anchored in the safety of shared affection. I always believed that morality was a sliding scale, a gradient of gray rather than a rigid line between right and wrong. But it wasn't until the day that changed everything for me that I truly understood just how complex human choices could be. My name is Ava, a 35-year-old graphic designer living in a small town where everyone knows everyone else's business. Recently, I found myself at a crossroads when it came to my best friend, Megan, and her escalating issues with her husband, Jason, who I had known for nearly as long as I had known her. It all started when I noticed subtle changes in Megan's demeanor. She had become quieter, more withdrawn, often distracted during our weekly brunches. After weeks of gentle nudging and concern, she finally opened up, revealing that Jason had begun to act possessive and controlling, belittling her in front of her friends and limiting her contact with us. The moment she confessed her struggles, a knot twisted tightly in my stomach. I could feel her pain, and the urge to confront Jason, to protect my friend, bubbled just under the surface. However, as Megan continued to share her story, I realized how deeply complicated the situation was. She still loved Jason, and despite his flaws, they had a life together that she didn't want to destroy. Still, as the weeks passed and her distress deepened, I became increasingly torn. Was it right to stand by silently while she suffered? I longed to speak out, to hold Jason accountable, but with each passing day, the thought of confronting him seemed more daunting than liberating. Picking up my phone, I considered reaching out to Jason for coffee under the pretense of catching up. But the idea of sitting across from him, feigning ignorance about the turmoil he was causing, made me feel dirty. It felt like betrayal, not just to him, but to Megan. Yet, I grappled with the fact that doing nothing felt like I was enabling his behavior. One night, I finally decided to vent my frustrations on an online forum dedicated to relationships and moral dilemmas, posting under the title AITA for refusing to do the morally correct thing. Writing it out helped, but circulating the thoughts in my mind only made the burden heavier. I didn't know what was right or wrong anymore, only that I was scared for Megan, scared for what might happen if I brought everything out into the open. Unlike most stories, mine did not fit into neat categories of good versus bad, hero versus villain. It was just a messy reality waiting to implode. Before I knew it, another few weeks slid by. Frustration began to bubble beneath my surface, tempered only by glimmers of hope as I observed Megan gradually reclaiming her voice, taking up yoga classes, meeting friends, and laughing again. However, amidst these moments of brightness, Jason still lurked in the background, his shadows looming heavier. One evening, while we were wrapping up dinner, Megan received a text that left her pale and shaking. It was Jason, apoplectic with jealousy over something trivial, her liking a post from an old friend on social media. I could see her teetering on the edge, like a bird testing the wind before flight. Thoughts warred inside me. Should I step in, remind her of the strength she had shown in the past few weeks, or should I keep my mouth shut and simply be the supportive friend while allowing her to navigate her feelings? I felt like I was watching a train wreck in slow motion. Eventually, I did what I had dreaded most. I reached out to Jason. My heart pounded as I crafted a message, not to accuse him, but to express genuine concern for both him and Megan. My intention was to balance compassion with clarity, but I was met with rage and denial. I wondered if I had opened a Pandora's box that could not be closed. When he accused me of trying to drive a wedge between them, I realized the irony of my position. In my attempt to do the right thing, I had unwittingly made myself the antagonist. In the following weeks, Megan confronted me after discovering my message to him. Her eyes, usually filled with warmth, were clouded with disappointment. I struggled to articulate my intentions, the care and worry I felt, but her heart was set on defending Jason, framing my actions as indiscriminate meddling. I had breached her trust, and suddenly, I felt like I was losing her all over again. Soon after, she distanced herself from me, creating a chasm between us that I feared was too wide to bridge. Yet, time has a funny way of softening the most jagged edges of our hearts. A few months later, I received a text from Megan, a single sentence that shattered the silence. I think I need to talk. When we met, the weight of our shared silence was palpable. Megan spoke of her feelings suffocating her, sprouting roots in the cracks of their relationship. She had grown disenchanted with Jason's behavior but felt trapped by her own heart, still fiercely in love but desiring independence. I listened intently as she unpacked her turmoil, aware that she was wrestling with the very emotions I once feared might consume her. This time, rather than leading with what I had wanted her to do, I became merely a vessel for her thoughts. In that moment, a wave of relief washed over me. Perhaps refusal to act decisively that day was not weakness but a necessary pause, allowing her to process her own feelings. By simply listening, I had helped her find the strength she inadvertently carried all along. In the months that followed, Megan started seeing a therapist and began to slowly reclaim her autonomy. They eventually parted ways, but to my joy, that didn't sever our friendship. Instead, it brought us closer as she learned to trust again, both in herself and in me. Now, whenever I revisit that challenging time, I reflect on how morality sometimes presents itself as a confusing puzzle, one where context molds our decisions, and perhaps my hesitation was the quiet space she needed to arrive at her own truth. As for Jason, he remains a specter in our past. While I refuse to vilify him, I recognize that some lessons require a deeper understanding of ourselves before we can act. I find comfort in knowing that we each navigate our paths at our own pace, learning that sometimes, the morally correct choice is simply to let someone discover their own strength. As I sit here, wrapped in the warmth of late afternoon sunlight streaming through my window, the peaceful hush of the neighborhood outside reminds me how far we've come since that turbulent chapter of our lives. My thoughts drift to the last moments we shared as a group before everything spiraled, an innocent dinner gathering where laughter danced around the table like light refracted through crystal, our conversations punctuated by the clinking of wine glasses and the steady simmer of rich tomato sauce in the kitchen. It was on that evening that I first sensed the underlying tension, the unspoken rift between Elizabeth and Jason that hung in the air like a fragile thread, barely visible but undeniably there. I remember glancing at Elizabeth, her smile a facade that cracked ever so slightly when Jason cracked his usual self-deprecating joke, an enthusiastic quip that drew a round of laughter but which I saw, in her eyes, was tinged with something deeper, disappointment, maybe, or a yearning for a connection that felt just out of reach. I had always been a firm believer in the importance of open communication, and I felt an instinctual urge to navigate the storm building between them, yet here I was, paralyzed by the weight of their love and conflict. Would I really be the one to pry it open, to force them into confrontation when perhaps Elizabeth needed to discover her limits in her own time? My heart whispered that sometimes intervention doesn't aid evolution, instead, it risks suffocating the growth that must occur organically. After Jason's sudden departure from our lives, the quiet stretched into a painful silence. Elizabeth threw herself into her art, creating with a fervor I hadn't seen before, colors splattering against canvas like the release she craved but couldn't express in words. Each brushstroke seemed to channel her pain, a cathartic reminder of resilience. I found solace in the idea that in allowing her to navigate her relationship with him, unlike the casual judgments thrown down from others in our circle, I had played an understated role in her journey of self-discovery. It was an odd comfort, knowing I had stood back, letting the fragile threads of her choices bind her together, even if the process left a knot in my own stomach. Some nights, we would sit on my cramped balcony, my old wind chimes tinkling softly in the breeze as the stars blinked like whispers overhead, and I would ask her, "Are you feeling okay?" Each word laced with genuine curiosity, waiting for her revealing truths. "Not yet," she'd reply softly, her gaze drawn to the cosmos, "but I'm figuring it out." There was something about those words, the way they hung in the air, heavy with unexpressed emotions, that settled an uneasy peace within me. I began to understand that the morally correct thing might not fray the edges of our friendships or force open wounds that needed time to heal. Instead, perhaps it simply meant stepping aside, guiding someone gently towards the door, and trusting they'd find their own way back to the light. Months passed, and I reveled in the small milestones, her laughter ringing out clearer, her sunsets painted with hope rather than sorrow. Each moment unfurled like petals in spring, moving us away from Jason's shadow and closer to a rediscovered autonomy. I would hear stories from mutual friends about where his life had wandered, the detours and dead ends that always intermingled with success. He became some mythic figure in the background of our lives. But it was strange how I could feel sympathy for him, too, an understanding that his decisions led him down a different, perhaps narrower path, even if they had hurt Elizabeth deeply. One evening, as we sat together on my balcony again, the sounds of distant laughter and music wafting through the complex, I found myself revealing my own struggles, my moments of indecision, the fears I had held tight like a lucky charm. Elizabeth listened, eyes bright and absorbing every word, and I could see the transformation within her had given her strength to bear my vulnerabilities without judgment. It felt freeing, this exchange of burdens. After all those months of navigating her own tumult, she offered in return a tender reassurance, "You're not wrong for wanting to be the good guy, you know. Just remember, sometimes being the good guy means knowing how to step back, too." In that quiet moment, surrounded by a galaxy spilling its secrets, I could finally let myself smile. I understood then that we are taught about right and wrong, but the grayness in between is where true morality thrives, in friendship, in support, and in allowing our loved ones to find their own light. As I write this reflection of our past, I can't help but think about the cascading ripples we leave in our wake, and how, even amid the tumult, learning to foster resilience can guide us through the murk toward clarity. I'm grateful for Elizabeth and the strength we both found in our friendship, a space that flourished as we chose patience over pressure and acceptance over judgment. Perhaps the heart of this journey is just that, trusting the quiet strength we each possess, the intricacies of human connection woven into our very souls, reminding us how important it is to navigate our own truths. As I contemplate our journey, I feel the warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the window, casting gentle patterns across the wooden floor. It's a peaceful scene, yet it's tinged with the weight of what we've both endured. Elizabeth and I have always been the kinds of friends who could spend hours tethered to each other's thoughts, sharing our stories over cups of herbal tea in that little cafe downtown, a sanctuary filled with the soft hum of conversations and the aroma of freshly baked pastries. It was there, between discussions of our dreams and fears, that we confronted the shadow of Jason, an enigmatic figure who once filled our lives with chaos. I remember that day vividly, the one when Elizabeth finally shared the truth she had carefully hidden, her voice barely above a whisper as she recounted moments of vulnerability, moments where Jason had chipped away at her self-worth with a snake's charm, always promising love yet delivering heartbreak. Listening to her pains felt like holding the last petal of a wilting flower, fragile and poignant. I wanted to rush in and fix everything, to demand she cut ties with him and reclaim her voice, but instead, I sensed a deeper truth spiraling within her, a truth she needed to discover for herself. I reassured her, my tone steady and calm, reminding her that real strength comes not from action alone, but from understanding one's own choices and standing firm in their wake. As the days turned into weeks, our dialogues evolved. Elizabeth began to unravel inside herself, peeling back layers that I didn't even realize weighed so heavily on her heart. I offered my support, a steady presence as she moved beyond what had been buried in shame and doubt, navigating the landscape of her identity. She poured her anger and confusion into her art, transforming pain into bursts of color that vibrated with the life she was reclaiming. I watched in awe as she began to bloom like the wildflowers in spring, each brushstroke a testament to her resilience. During these pivotal moments, I often found myself wrestling with my decisions. Was I doing the morally correct thing by allowing her to wander through this messy journey without directing her? I questioned whether by standing back, I was somehow failing her, but deep down, I recognized that my role was not to be her knight rescuing her from the dragon, but rather the quiet guide who opened the door to her own fortress. This reflection echoed back to the reality that sometimes love means granting the agency to those we care for, allowing them the space to face truths that would ultimately lead to their liberation. In observing Elizabeth transform, I realized her process mirrored my own in profound ways. There were moments in my past, especially in my own relationships, where I sought to remain complicit rather than confrontation, choosing the path of least resistance over the arduous climb toward honesty. Eventually, she came to a decision late one evening. I could see it in the light flickering behind her eyes as we met at our usual spot. She was filled with a kind of quiet determination, reflecting the hues of a sunset surrendering to twilight. I told him it was over, she said, her voice steady as if she were confirming an appointment rather than ending a significant chapter of her life. In that moment, I felt a swell of pride for her, a deep recognition of the strength that had always resided within her. There was fear and sadness, yes, but there was also freedom, a shedding of burdens that she never deserved to carry. We sat there for a while, letting the silence envelop us like an embrace, both savoring her brave leap into the unknown. As I look back now, it's almost surreal how life unraveled. Months pass in a wash of colors, yet the vibrant patterns of our friendship remained anchored amidst the chaos. Elizabeth blossomed in ways I had never anticipated. She began giving talks at local art galleries, exploring themes of resilience and self-discovery, while I took to writing, chronicling our journey and its lessons. The landscape of our lives was no longer cluttered with remnants of the past but infused with hope and new beginnings. We learned that the morally correct path isn't always straightforward. It can lead you through uncharted territories, revealing nuances of strength hidden in vulnerability. Reflecting on our experience, I understand now that surrendering to the complexities of human emotion is a necessity. Rather than simply navigating the seas of righteousness, we embrace the ebb and flow of life and relationships, allowing ourselves to anchor in our truths. As I pour my thoughts onto paper, I find solace in this realization. There's a quiet beauty in patience, a strength in allowing others to find their own way, and perhaps the moral compass we seek often points inward, guiding us through the tides of our own existence. And though the future will always remain uncertain, I find strength in knowing that both Elizabeth and I have learned not just to face the storms but to dance in the rain, celebrating every moment of clarity that follows. As I close this chapter, I feel a gentle warmth within, a reminder that life is but a series of interconnected stories waiting to be shared and understood. In this shared understanding, I find comfort, and perhaps, in our own little way, we are each entitled to navigate the moral dilemmas of our lives, trusting in our ability to find meaning and growth. The sun was dipping below the horizon as I sat on my porch, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands and the gentle rustle of leaves filling the quiet air. It was one of those evenings when the world felt still, a perfect backdrop for the thoughts swirling in my mind about my sister, Kathy, and her unusual fixation on her new child. She had been so ecstatic when she announced her pregnancy, and even now, weeks after little Milo's birth, the whole family was under the spell of this newborn. Everyone, it seemed, except me. As I sipped my tea, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, not with Milo, but with the way Kathy was treating him. The moment I stepped into her house for the first time post-delivery, I was hit with a wave of bizarrely exaggerated decor dedicated to him. Photos plastered across the walls, his name in neon lights above a crib that seemed more like a museum piece than a place for sleeping. It felt less like celebrating a life and more like a personal art installation from Kathy that demanded to reclaim the attention she had always been dependent on. I could recall something each time I visited, the wild comments rolling off her tongue, like how she believed Milo was destined for greatness, as if he were already writing the next great American novel from his crib. Wincing at such pressure woven into a life that was only just beginning, I wondered if anyone else saw the disconnection behind her infatuation. It all came to a head during this one family gathering. The air was thick with a mix of laughter and baby cooing when it slipped out, an offhand remark from me in a moment of terrible impatience. I had meant it lightly, but the words spiraled beyond my control. "Kathy, I know you love him, but I don't think a plastic doll counts as a real baby." Her face had drained of color, and the entire room went silent, eyes darting back and forth between us. I could hardly breathe, the shocking realization of what I had said crashing over me like a wave, and suddenly I was the villain in everyone's tale. Kathy's hands trembled as she held Milo close to her, a line of protectiveness flaring to life. I watched her posture close in, her expression blackening like a storm cloud. "What do you mean, a doll? He's my baby," she retorted, her voice sharp yet fragile, as if the words were made of glass. I stammered a half-hearted apology, fumbling with my thoughts in the face of her hurt. Part of me felt guilty for not taking her obsession seriously, but another part boiled with frustration. I loved her, and I wanted her to step back from this illusion, this almost delusional state she had created around motherhood, a base trust built on the genuine nurturing that true parenting demanded. Over the next couple of weeks, my life became a tangle of texts from family members asking if I was okay, trying to convince me to apologize profusely, or shaming me for my insensitive comment. Meanwhile, Kathy retreated into herself, avoiding me during family dinners, which just made the entire situation more awkward. I couldn't help but feel a swell of loneliness, like a haze settling over me. I kept fixing our broken relationship in my mind, pondering how I could ease her back to reality without jeopardizing our bond. Finally, in a moment of clarity amidst the fog of my anxieties, I sat down with a pen and paper. I wrote Kathy a letter, pouring out my heart in the way I couldn't face her directly. I told her I saw the mother in her, the love she poured into her baby, but that I worried she was losing the chance to be present in Milo's life by creating a world that felt unreal. A few days later, she responded. The letter was heartfelt, thick with emotion, but she'd woven in threads of defensiveness, describing how she felt so much pressure as a new mother to get everything right. I understood then that she wasn't just immersed in an illusion for my sake but for herself, a desperate attempt to claim identity in a role that felt immense and overwhelming. We met afterward at the park, the crisp air bringing fresh hope as I walked alongside her, both of us with our insecurities and tenderness laid bare. I promised to support her, to be there through the chaos and sleepless nights, and as we laughed at the ridiculousness of plastic dolls in the middle of our shared parental journey, I felt the aching distance begin to disappear, with the first baby steps toward reconciliation. So, was I the asshole? I asked her gently, needing to know if I had crossed a line too far. She shook her head, her lips curling upwards into a soft smile. "No, just a blunt sister who cares too much." In that moment, the weight I had carried began to lift, crafting an opening through which trust and love could flow again. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other, real and raw, ready to navigate this strange world of parenting together, one imperfect step at a time. A few months later, reflecting on that night, I found that Kathy had truly embraced the chaotic journey of motherhood. She had filled her home with memories instead of just decorations, and I often caught glimpses of her laughing at some mess Milo had made, remembering how quickly life can be both beautiful and exhausting. It was a reminder of the deeper roots of connection, real or metaphorical, the bond that continued to thrive despite the heated moments, rendering the word asshole a distant afterthought on our shared journey of love. As I settled into bed that evening, I took a deep breath, allowing the warmth of family and the nature of recovery to weave into my dreams, knowing that the true beauty of life lies in our imperfections. The next few days passed in a gentle blur, each moment blending into another like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. My thoughts danced between the sweet laughter of my niece and the shadows of that sharp confrontation with my sister. Sipping coffee in my small kitchen, I let my mind wander as I watched the rain streak against the window, imagining the little milestones I expected Milo to reach. And then, as if the universe cottoned to my neglect and acknowledging the unresolved feelings swirling inside me, my phone buzzed, pulling me back to reality. It was a message from Claire, one of those whimsical updates she loved to send, featuring a video of Milo clutching at a stuffed giraffe while gurgling pleasantly. Despite the swirling conflict that had weighed on my heart, I couldn't help but smile at the sight of him, his innocent joy begging for love and attention. As the days rolled on, I found myself reflecting deeply about what had transpired between my sister and me. It wasn't just her intense love for Milo that prompted the conflict, it was my own feelings of disconnection and discomfort. I hadn't held a baby in years. I had no framework to understand my sister's adoration, which often felt overwhelming in its intensity. Is that why I reacted so harshly? I mused, tracing the lines of the wooden table with my fingers. It was a lesson in empathy, one that demanded from me an exploration beyond the tangible, into the depths of reason and emotion. Face to face with my own vulnerabilities, I understood that I had played the role of the contrarian, perhaps attempting to temper her unyielding praise with my rational skepticism, but in doing so, I had dismissed a fundamental part of her motherhood. Later that week, I decided it was time to extend the olive branch, realizing that this misunderstanding could easily fracture our close-knit bond if left unaddressed. I invited her for a coffee in a cozy cafe perched on the corner of our neighborhood, a spot that held joyful memories of laughter and sisterly connection. As I took a seat at the small round table, my heart fluttered with a mix of remorse and courage. Claire arrived shortly thereafter, her expression betraying a mix of apprehension and curiosity. "Hey," she greeted, her eyes darting before settling on mine. A moment hung heavily between us, as if time itself was hesitating to take the next step. "Hey," I replied, motioning for her to sit. "I wanted to talk, to clear the air." She nodded, her fingers wrapping nervously around her coffee cup. The barista delivered our drinks, breaking the tension momentarily with the scent of fresh espresso and the quiet hum of cups clinking. "I feel like I hurt you when I said that thing about Milo," I began, my voice softer than anticipated as I approached the crux of our dilemma. "I shouldn't have dismissed your love for him. It's real and powerful, and it's something to be celebrated, not questioned." Her brow furrowed in contemplation. "It's just, sometimes, I feel like people don't understand," she finally admitted, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "They think because I have a different experience of motherhood, or maybe because I'm a little overprotective, it makes me less valid. I don't want you to see him like that." The air around us lightened. And I felt the walls we had built slowly begin to crumble. My heart ached for the love we shared, but also for the walls we had built in moments of misunderstanding. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Claire. I've been struggling to connect with that part of your life. I just didn't expect the reaction I had," I confessed, a tremor within the lines of my voice. It was almost cathartic to admit that I had been caught off guard by the power of her maternal instinct, and in that breath of honesty, a subtle understanding bloomed between us. She nodded, her once tense posture softening with each word exchanged. As we continued to talk, honesty ricocheting between our hearts, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't anticipated. Sharing our fears, our insecurities as sisters navigated in different realms of life, allowed us to embrace the authenticity of our experience. The conversation drifted toward lighter topics, both of us eventually finding bits of laughter woven back into our dialogue. And right before we parted, Claire leaned over and took my hands in hers, her laughter rolling like waves echoing the warmth we had built back. "Let's schedule a weekend together at my place? I'd love for you to spend time with Milo. I think he'll really enjoy getting to know his amazing aunt." When I returned home, the weight of conflict lifted significantly. I realized I had so much to learn, yet it was wonderful to resonate with the ongoing journey toward understanding. Through my sister's eyes, through her simplest joys, I could find connections twinkling in the small moments, an invitation to a new life cradled not just in love but also in the vulnerability of letting go of what I thought and embracing the reality of what truly is. Some days are beautiful messes, and I knew I had a part to play in coloring those experiences with her, as sisters and as a family. Over the following weeks, I remained intertwined with Claire and Milo's lives more intimately, engaging in every one of their innocent moments with increasing excitement. Eventually, as I lay down each night, I allowed myself moments to reflect on how beautifully tangled our lives had become. Each layer, each moment of honesty, formed an intricate tapestry of connection woven from love, understanding, and acceptance. In those peaceful reflections, intertwined with laughter and the echo of a new understanding, I found the kind of solace I hadn't known I was searching for. The realization dawned upon me as I drifted to sleep that maybe life's imperfections and challenges could incite the most profound connections, and it was those very bonds I'd built with my sister that reminded me of the remarkable tapestry of life we all share, even, and perhaps especially, when we don't fully understand each other. The morning sun broke through the curtains with a gentle glow, nudging me awake to another day intertwined with the realities of sisterhood and the enigmatic world of parenthood. As I rose from my slumber, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air, beckoning me towards the kitchen where Emma busied herself, cradling Milo with one arm while stirring a pot of oatmeal with the other. The sight was almost cinematic, a perfect blend of chaos and tenderness that defined her new life. I couldn't help but smile, but a familiar twinge of guilt laced my thoughts. The previous day's confrontation hung in the air like an uncomfortable breeze, and I knew we hadn't fully wrapped up our discussion about what it meant to be a mother in her eyes versus mine. Over breakfast, our conversation flowed effortlessly at first, light-hearted remarks exchanged amid spoonfuls of oatmeal and the sporadic gurgle of Milo. But as Emma shared her latest parenting triumphs and trials, I could feel the unsaid words lingering between us, creating an important, yet unspoken, tension. Just as the atmosphere turned fragile, I watched her face transform, suddenly reflecting the worry I had seen only moments before in her laughter. "Do you really believe Milo isn't a real baby?" she asked, her voice hanging between vulnerability and defiance. My heart sank. I had never intended to undermine her journey, but the truth I spoke felt so distant from the love she poured into him. "It's not that he isn't real," I stammered, trying to tread carefully. "It's more about how we perceive these relationships. Your love for him is immeasurable, but I worry about how these expectations affect you." Her brow furrowed, and I could see the storm of emotions brewing just behind her eyes. "You think I'm playing house?" she hissed, each word a sharp shard. I could feel the ground beneath me shifting, my own heart racing as fear knotted my stomach. It was difficult to see my sister hurt, and the distance between our perspectives only widened in that moment. "No, Emma, that's not what I meant at all." My voice softened, the urgency to mend the rift propelling me forward. "I want to celebrate your bond. I see how much you love him, but I also want to make sure you don't find yourself lost in this identity." She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "How can I be lost when I spent years dreaming of moments like these? How can you think I wouldn't know what's real?" There it was, the core of her pain, the feeling of not being understood, not being seen in the half-light of doubt I had cast over her life. I felt a wave of emotion crash over me as I searched for the right words to bridge the chasm. "I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling the sincerity of my apology wash over my words. "I'm afraid of what happens when the novelty fades and how it might feel to confront the reality of parenting. I just want to make sure you're okay." Her silence spoke volumes, a mixture of resentment, understanding, and perhaps a trace of compassion for my misplaced fear. We remained suspended in that moment until slowly, like the dawn creeping through the night, she exhaled deeply. "I appreciate your concern, but I wish you could trust me more. I'm deep in this, and it's beautiful, even if it's messy." Those words etched themselves on my heart, each syllable a reminder of the need for trust amidst uncertainty. With that, the tension began melting away as if the morning sunlight was burning through our darkness. We spent the rest of the day navigating shared moments together, plays with Milo transforming into laughter-filled bursts of joy, the kind only siblings can ignite in each other. As the hours passed, with each silly face made and every coup exchanged, I let go of the need to be right and allowed space for Emma to lead. When evening fell, and the amber dusk settled lazily outside the windows, we curled onto the couch, each cradling Milo, their hearts synchronized in a new rhythm of understanding. I held my breath as she began to sing softly, tapping into that innate bond that tied us together, unearthing things that transcended mere words. I felt a sense of clarity wash over me, reassuring me that the journey we were on was uniquely ours, regardless of how we perceived it. I realized that love exists in its many forms, and in order to embrace that love, we didn't have to understand every facet of it, we simply had to accept it. That night, as I drifted into sleep once more, I felt a deep sense of peace, a profound connection to my sister fortified by our shared vulnerabilities. The beauty of our imperfect lives felt both heavy and light, reminding me that we carry each other as we navigate through the complexities of love and identity. My heart swelled at the thought of the many future moments we would continue to craft together against the backdrop of life's ever-changing tapestry. Although I hadn't found all the answers, I took comfort in knowing that I was never alone on this journey, and perhaps that was what mattered most. It was supposed to be just another holiday gathering, filled with laughter, festive decorations, and a bit too much eggnog, yet it transformed into one of the most pivotal moments of my life. My close-knit group of friends had established a tradition of a white elephant gift exchange, where the goal was to bring something humorous or quirky to swap around the circle. This year, I felt inspired. After days of thinking, I decided to gift a vintage-looking box, aged like an artifact, wrapped in gold foil that glimmered under the twinkling Christmas lights. Little did any of us know, it was more than just an old box. To everyone's amusement, when my best friend Alex unwrapped it, inside was a scratch-off lottery ticket I had thrown in on a whim, just to keep things lighthearted. Laughter erupted when he scratched it off only to find out that it was worth over $1 million. At that moment, it felt like I was in a fairy tale. Yet, as the initial shock began to fade, a heavy feeling settled in my stomach, as excitement morphed into uncertainty. For days, we celebrated, a party filled with playful banter, immense joy, and, surprisingly, stakes that transformed the bonds of friendship into something frayed and fragile. The conversation soon shifted from congratulatory remarks to some friends expressing that, because the winning ticket had originated from my white elephant gift, I had an obligation to share the wealth. After all, the ticket had not just sprung forth from thin air, it was part of a game played between us. I remember sitting at home in my small, cozy apartment that night, staring at the blinking light of my phone as the group chat erupted with opinions, judgments, and a sense of entitlement that rattled me to my core. I began to feel torn. On one hand, I wanted to help my friends, especially since they had been my support group through thick and thin, but on the other, it was a significant amount of money that I had never expected to see, and it felt deeply personal to me. As I continued to navigate the whirlwind of discussions, some of my friends took it a step further, outright demanding their share of my newfound fortune. They argued that I shouldn't have even included the ticket as part of the gift, highlighting how, as the giver, I had unintentionally created this awkward position. My doubts began to grow into whispers in my mind, trying to convince me that I was the one who was being selfish and greedy. Such thoughts gnawed at me, leading to sleepless nights, but I also cherished the idea that perhaps this money could help me rebuild my life. I had been stuck in a rut, toiling away in a mediocre job that barely paid enough to cover rent and bills, and now I could not only pay off my debts, but I could also travel, invest in furthering my career, and maybe even start on that overly ambitious dream of mine, opening a small bookstore cafe by the coast where stories would seep through the walls like sweet laughter. But the rift grew. The gifts from Christmas became burdens that I contemplated every waking moment. To distance myself from the conversations that blurred the lines of friendship, I withdrew from the group chat for a time, taking each day to regroup. I took long walks in the nearby park, letting the cool air fill my lungs while my mind wrestled with the notion of entitlement. I even visited an old bookstore to distract myself, where I could lose hours wandering between the bookshelves that smelled of musty paper and adventure. Eventually, after a week of wrestling with my thoughts, I decided to face my friends. I arranged a casual dinner, a final gathering to resolve our unspoken tension. As the evening unfolded, I chose to be honest. I sat them down, carefully explaining how the ticket had landed in a box meant solely for fun, devoid of the weight of expectations and obligations. I wanted to stress that while they were my dear friends, the money felt deeply personal to me, a newfound hope for my future. I could see their disappointment, and truthfully, it pierced me. The laughter that had once echoed around us now felt muted. However, I also saw glimmers of understanding in their eyes, and that conversation provided the resolution we so desperately needed. It wasn't about who deserved what, but about maintaining the bonds we had nurtured over the years. As the night wound down, one friend, Clara, who had always been the voice of reason, gave me a reflective look. She smiled softly and stated, "You know, sometimes life throws us surprises, not to be shared or divided, but to change our paths." It struck me deeply. That moment became a tapestry of emotions, a blend of relief, sadness, and resolve. I chose to embrace the good that the lottery had brought into my life while also holding steadfast to the relationships that mattered. In the weeks that followed, I found my footing. I still communicated with my friends, but now it was with less pressure, and whatever division had sprung eased with understanding and communication. Instead of sharing a part of my winnings, I offered to treat them to a weekend trip to celebrate our friendship without the strings of money. And in many ways, the act of spending time together felt even more fulfilling than any monetary exchange. In the end, it was not just about the lottery ticket but about navigating the complexities of relationships and choosing to value friendship over obligation. Ultimately, the lottery had not stripped me of friends but led me to reassess what truly mattered, the authenticity of connections that would thrive regardless of wealth. Update: a few months later, I took another little leap. I followed my heart and opened that bookstore cafe. It was cozy and beautifully chaotic, filled with shelves of stories inviting all who came in. I was pleasantly surprised when some friends offered to contribute their time and skills to help me shoulder the load. Clara even stepped up and helped design the space, jarred mugs with coded messages printed on the sides for the secret menu. There's joy in seeing the delight on people's faces as they step into a world of books and coffee, and on Saturdays, when the place is bustling, I've realized that my path hasn't just changed, it's blossomed into something altogether beautiful. But just as everything was coming together, a shadow loomed over my little haven of caffeine and literature. It was a few months after our grand opening when I received an unexpected call from my brother, Mark, who, after a string of misfortunes, had moved back in with our parents. "You won't believe it," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "I bought a lottery ticket, and I actually won $50,000. I could hear the triumph behind his words, and part of me felt uplifted by his good fortune, but another part of me squirmed at the implications. After all, during that white elephant gift exchange a few weeks prior, we had used the ticket as just that, a joke among friends, something to pass around for laughs, like the ugly sweater no one wanted. The ticket had cost a mere $10, but now it had transformed into an unexpected fortune. The problem lingered in the back of my mind like an itch: should I pay my brother back for that ticket? My first instinct was to smile and celebrate his success, acknowledging his hard luck turning into a windfall. However, as I watched the cafe thrive, my initial goodwill began to warp under the weight of guilt. I hadn't contributed anything to that silly ticket, nor had I envisioned sharing the wealth or what it might mean for my brother to suddenly have significant amounts of money. It shouldn't be a burdensome obligation, should it? The constant flirtation with self-doubt made my heart race. As I ruminated, I also felt a growing resentment rise against Mark. He was back with my parents, lacking direction, while I had pulled myself together to create something fulfilling. Every week, he kept bringing up potential ideas for what he could do with the winnings. A vacation. Then a new car. In those moments, I found myself resenting that $10 ticket more and more. Weeks passed, and I noticed more requests from Mark. While the cafe had become a green and nurturing space for creativity, Mark's intentions weighed heavy on me. "Why don't you just loan me a little bit to get started?" he'd suggest, each word slithering into my brain like smoke. "You can always recoup it after I get my business going." One afternoon, as I stirred the rich, dark coffee, my stomach twisted with anxiety. Clara noticed and stopped by with a gentle touch to my arm. "What's bothering you?" she asked, and I hesitated before spilling my thoughts like beans into a grinding machine. She listened quietly, concern knitting her brow. "You're not obligated to share anything," she said finally, taking a sip of her espresso, "but you shouldn't feel guilty if you want to help." But there was more to it. It was the emotional knot I had with Mark, our childhood, entwined in responsibility and rivalry. I resented the fact that he had the ability to get something for nothing while I had to build everything from my courage and sweat. One Thursday afternoon, I finally decided to confront him. "Listen, Mark," I started, holding the phone to my ear, feeling the warmth of the cafe's summer breeze danced around me. "I know you're excited about your winnings, and I'm happy for you, but you need to understand. I can't help with your plans. That ticket was never mine to claim or share." His silence felt heavy, a moment too long before he spoke. "Wow, so that's it?" The chill in his tone froze me in place. It felt dreadful but necessary to stand firm, to balance the weight of harsh truth with the buoyancy of love. "But it's my ticket," he continued defiantly. "You were there when I bought it. It's not just luck, I could have picked another ticket, you know? Be better. Be supportive." With every word he poured out, my resolve thinned. "I'm trying to be supportive, Mark, but you can't expect me, of all people, to just distribute money when I'm still figuring out my own life." Somehow, I managed to hang up without feeling like a complete jerk, and as I processed the conversation, I finally felt a flicker of relief. Time passed, and the confrontation became a raw, necessary wound that slowly healed. Through the simmering tension with my brother, I found clarity about my own dreams. The cafe continued to thrive, filled with laughter, warmth, and the soft scent of beans roasting in the back. Clara became my confidant, and together we hosted small writing workshops, each word crafted under the light of connection. Despite the distance with Mark, I began to accept that his choices were his own, separate from my journey, as I found empowerment in the depths of the rooted relationships I built day by day. Months later, I received a text from Mark, one that was devoid of the old bitterness. "Hey, I went on a little trip. It was great. Hope the cafe's doing well," he wrote. A simple note that felt woven with maturity and intent. I responded, letting him know how much the cafe had grown. I didn't owe him anything, and while our relationship became more distant over time, I couldn't help but feel a thread of hope weaving back through our connection, fragile yet promising, just like the very venture I cherished. As I stood behind the counter one morning, with sunlight spilling golden rays through the window, I realized that sometimes, making choices for your happiness meant letting go of guilt, a lesson I hoarded quietly as I breathed in the intoxicating aroma of roasted beans and fresh stories yet to be told. The cafe continued to flourish, much to my delight. I leaned into the rhythm of each day, where the sound of the door chiming would greet me with the promise of new connections. One particularly crisp morning, I found myself overwhelmed with gratitude as I greeted regulars and newcomers. Alike, their smiles infectious, the aroma of brewing coffee wrapping around us like a soft blanket. Clara had this way of lighting up the room whenever she walked in. She carried an energy that was both calming and invigorating. That day, however, felt different. A magnetic energy buzzed beneath the ordinary hustle and bustle. I was preparing for a community event, one that Clara had suggested to foster deeper ties with our patrons. We decided to host a monthly open mic night, where writers, musicians, and poets could showcase their talents, a showcase of voices competing only with the sound of clattering mugs and warm laughter. It was during our final preparations, stringing fairy lights above the circular tables and piling chairs in cozy arrangements, that I noticed Jason standing outside the cafe, hands shoved deep in his pockets with that same familiar expression etched across his features, a mix of longing and hesitation. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. No matter how far our lives had drifted apart, the sight of him brought back a whirlwind of memories and a rush of old emotions. For a moment, I debated whether to invite him inside, but the fog of uncertainty clouded my decision. As the evening wore on and the cafe came alive, untouched notes filled the air, voices weaving tales both heartwarming and haunting. Clara's infectious laughter faded in and out as I caught glimpses of familiar faces sharing moments, and then, almost as if time had folded, Jason stepped through the door. The room hushed momentarily, strangers turned into an audience, and I felt my pulse quicken. He looked around, his eyes searching, and landed on me with a gaze so earnest that it melted the seconds into something palpable. I couldn't help but manage a weak smile, my heart oscillating between pleasure and panic. After the first act concluded, he approached me, and I could feel the vibrations of my surroundings dim, the clinking glasses and buzzing chatter fading into the backdrop of our shared history. "I came to see you," he confessed, his voice the same as I remembered but laced with a timbre of vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. I blinked, struggling for words. Here we stood, transformed by time, yet the undercurrents of unspoken sentiments lingered in the air like a fine mist. I asked him how he had found me, and the conversation spilled out like secrets carefully hoarded, revealing pieces of our lives since we last made contact. He told me about his trials, struggles with his decisions, and how he'd realized the importance of relationships that once mattered to him. Encouraging him to join the open mic crowd, I found myself eased by the moment. The fear I had pinpointed as regret fell softly as he stepped up to perform, seemingly transformed by the acceptance that enveloped him. As he shared his heartfelt song, the audience felt like a gentle embrace, and I couldn't help but lose myself in the harmony that wove through the room. There was beauty in the shared experience. It reminded me that reconciliation doesn't always seek perfection, but requires vulnerability and openness to growth. Our paths, so differently aligned, had somehow allowed us to converge again, revealing that understanding could form new threads, stitching old pains with the fabric of compassion. By the time the last act settled and the cafe's light began to dim, Jason and I found ourselves enveloped in a tranquil embrace of understanding. As I locked up and waved goodbye to the last lingering customers, who unfurled their stories into the night, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. Perhaps, I mused, mistakes didn't have to be anchors but rather lessons gently guiding us toward growth and renewal. With the sweet taste of coffee lingering in my mouth and the warmth of rekindled connection bubbling in my chest, I closed the door behind me, knowing that life would never cease to surprise me with its exquisite range of possibilities. I fell into a contemplative silence as I reflected on the days unfolding, grateful not just for the cafe, but for the chance encounters and unpredictable paths that lead us back to where we truly belong, whether with friends old or new, wrapped in the comfort of second chances. It was a humid Friday afternoon when I saw the text from my sister pop up on my phone, the kind of sunlight that seeps heavily through the leaves, wrapping everything in a luminous green haze. "Can we talk about the baby shower?" It read, and even before I opened it, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. Family gatherings usually put me on edge, but this one stung particularly because of my niece, Haley, who was just beginning to step into this whirlwind of adulthood and motherhood, a young woman at 22 with barely a grasp on her own dreams, let alone the burdens of parenting. My sister had always held on tightly to the idea that families should rally together for every celebration, but I wasn't about to jump into the fire this time. With 3 kids and a full-time job that drained every ounce of energy I had, I couldn't afford to take on anything else, especially something as elaborate as a baby shower. The weight of my sister's expectations loomed heavy, and yet it felt unjust, like I was the antagonist in a story I didn't agree to be part of. When I met her for coffee the next day, the savoriness of the espresso barely touched my tongue as her melancholy but hopeful gaze settled on me. "I was hoping you'd consider hosting the shower at your place," she said, almost too lightly, but I could hear the urgency beneath her words. The cafe buzzed around us, laughter and chatter filling the air, and I could almost drown in it, wishing for the world to swallow me whole rather than face this conversation. "I just think it would mean a lot to Haley if we did something nice," she continued, and there it was, the guilt trip launchpad. My mind raced as I tried to visualize it, balloons in my small living room, a sea of pastel decor clashing with my casual aesthetic, and then there was the idea of Haley's friends showing up, all bubbly and full of youthful energy, while I sat, the bored executioner of this so-called celebratory event. "I just don't think I can handle it," I finally uttered, my voice almost quiet against the ruckus around us. Her eyebrows knitted together, a sign of disappointment that cut deeper than I'd anticipated. "But I thought we were in this together," she replied, hurt seeping through her words like water through a cracked dam. I felt a pang of guilt and uncertainty twist in my stomach, and for a moment, I wondered if maybe I was being selfish for wanting to protect my own peace. I wished I could take it back, but my loyalty to my own limits pushed me to stand my ground. We ended the conversation with an awkward hug, and as I drove home, a cloud of tension settled over my thoughts, swirling wildly as I deliberated my feelings. Shouldn't I have felt obligated to help my sister? My heart tugged at the part of me that wanted to be a good aunt, while my head screamed for self-preservation. Days turned into a week, and I found myself dodging family messages, pretending to be busy and overwhelmed while grappling with the disappointment I had left in my sister's eyes. Haley, oblivious to our frayed threads, posted on social media about the struggles of pregnancy, her joy mixed with worries, and I felt the weight of my own decisions pressing heavier against my chest. It was then that I noticed a photo of her clutching a tiny pair of baby shoes, her glowing smile juxtaposed against a backdrop that flourished with love and excitement from her friends. My heart sank a little lower. Maybe I'd misjudged the situation. Perhaps my presence at the shower was more significant than I'd thought, a file within a larger family moment that would eventually fade into nostalgia for Haley. A few days later, I reached out to my sister, my fingers hesitating over the screen, not sure what to say. "I'm sorry for shutting you out. How about we do something simple? Like, a small get-together at your house?" The reply came almost instantly, her joy a visible burst through the digital barrier. "I'd love that. We can make it work." Having said yes to a smaller version of the event felt like a burden lifted, the knot in my chest loosening a fraction, but I was still met with trepidation about the whole ordeal. As the day approached, I helped my sister prepare rather than overstretch myself, creating an intimate environment that felt fitting for the occasion, welcoming just a handful of people. The atmosphere shifted, the gathering was infused with laughter and light conversation, a gentle pace that allowed us to relish in small moments. When I finally embraced Haley, her eyes shining as she expressed her gratitude, something softened within me. It wasn't about the big lavish events or the effort that one apparently had to offer. Instead, it was about the connections we fostered amid chaos, the memories formed beneath the laughter and subtle glances. I left the shower that evening feeling lighter, having found joy in the simplicity of family bonding, realizing I wasn't the antagonist I had assumed. As life continues to unfold, I wonder about the many roles we play and the weight of our choices, ultimately discovering that sometimes, Being present is the greatest gift we can offer. Update: a couple of months after the shower, I received a text from Haley. "You were the best aunt. I'll need you by my side when the baby arrives." True to the nature of life, my anxieties began to bubble beneath my skin again. I could feel the knot forming once more. However, this time, there was a different spark of excitement laced through the worries. Perhaps my growth lay not just in learning about hosting, perhaps it was also about embracing the beautiful chaos ahead of us as a family, and that in itself felt like offering a profound love, even if chaos threatened to overtake it. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and adjustments. I found myself caught somewhere between the anticipation of Haley's arrival and the heavy weight of my self-doubt. Each time I picked up my phone to message her, I hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen as I replayed our past interactions in my mind. What would she think if I voiced my fears? What if my honesty discouraged her? It was a strange dance I found myself doing, where I wanted to be supportive but feared I might come off as inadequate, as if my very presence might overshadow her joy. Every time I thought about the baby shower, the knot in my stomach tightened just a bit more. I'd spent hours Googling cute party themes and sculpting perfect Pinterest boards, wanting to give Haley the celebration she deserved, but a part of me still flinched at the thought of it. Despite the excitement in her texts, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping on shaky ground, teetering between wanting to be the best aunt I could be and worrying I might inadvertently ruin the day. One Saturday morning, after a particularly vivid dream about not showing up at her shower and Haley's disappointed face haunting me throughout the day, I decided to dive headfirst into planning mode. I rummaged through my stash of decorations tucked away in the attic, retrieving boxes of fairy lights, streamers, and balloons, remnants from a happier time when I had hosted parties more carefree. Dust motes floated in the sunlight filtering through the windows, and I took a moment to breathe in the nostalgia, memories of laughter and laughter-filled nights swirling around me. That was the turning point. I began combing through local shops for unique baby gifts, thinking of Haley's style and colors she loved. Each item I picked up felt like an offering of love, a piece of my heart wrapped up in careful thought. I surprised myself with how enjoyable the process became, my anxieties dissipating into a soft acceptance of the love we were all bound to share. The chaotic beauty of family seemed a little less overwhelming, and I started to understand that chaos isn't always destructive. Sometimes, it's what binds and strengthens our connections. The day of the shower arrived with sunlight draping the living room in golden warmth. Family and friends crowded in, filling the space with laughter and the sweet scent of baked goods. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. As Haley walked in, her glow eclipsing everything else, I couldn't help but smile. She looked radiant, and her happiness became infectious, pulling me from my anxious shell. We embraced tightly, and I whispered, "Let's just have fun." As the shower progressed, I busied myself ensuring everyone was enjoying themselves, but I kept a close eye on Haley. No longer did I feel like an imposter in the role of an aunt. Instead, I embraced every hug, every laugh shared among us. When Haley opened her gifts, her eyes sparkled brighter than I had ever seen. I watched her exude awe with each present, her gratitude pouring out as she shared stories with each person who had contributed to her journey into motherhood. That connection, that emotional exchange, was the heart of the chaos, the undercurrent that nurtured each moment we spent together. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of purple and gold, I felt a content sigh escape my lips. I had not only helped organize a memorable day, I had also rekindled my sense of belonging within the family, reconnecting me with an identity I had almost neglected. Haley caught my gaze and, with a beaming smile, whispered, "Thank you for everything." In that moment, all my previous doubts seemed to evaporate, replaced by the warmth of our bond. In the weeks that followed Haley's shower, I embraced our family's evolving dynamics. I found joy in little things, like evening phone calls filled with baby name brainstorming and sharing in her cravings. Each conversation brought me closer to that little being who hadn't even arrived yet but already held such a special place in our hearts. As Haley eventually entered motherhood, the beautiful chaos I had once feared became a familiar dance of endless affection and unexpected moments. I wasn't just her aunt anymore, I was an active participant in her life and her child's, relishing the highs and comforting her through the lows. One evening, a few months after the shower, I laid in bed reflecting on my journey, tapping my fingers gently against my pillow. The knot that had once felt so constrictive was now just a gentle reminder of my growth. Perhaps being an aunt wasn't about perfection but about presence, sharing laughter, standing in support, and never shying away from the beautifully tangled web that is family. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, I left behind all doubts, embracing an open heart for whatever lovely chaos would come next, welcoming the new chapters that awaited us all. As the weeks rolled on, I found myself swept up in a rhythm, one that intertwined the mundane with the miraculous, the simple moments with the monumental milestones of Haley's pregnancy. I remember a particular afternoon when I stopped by her place to drop off some groceries. The spring sun poured in through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over everything, and I was immediately struck by how vibrant she looked. Her pregnancy was sculpting her, transforming her into an even more radiant version of the girl I once watched dream of starting her own family. We sat at her small, round table over steaming cups of herbal tea, each sip grounding me more into this new, familial role I was learning to embrace. With every chat we shared, small ripples of vulnerability merged with laughter, weaving an intricate tapestry of connection that brought us even closer. Haley, with her wide, expressive eyes, would recount her fears about motherhood, the worry lines settling more frequently on her brow as her due date approached. I listened intently, nodding in recognition of the depth of her feelings, echoing my own reflections of inadequacy that had bubbled over. During the shower planning, it made me realize how much our experiences, though different, had a common thread woven by love, expectations, and a hint of self-doubt. One particularly rainy evening, as I scrolled through social media, I came across a post from my sister announcing that they had decided to throw a welcome home party for little Charlie, Haley's baby. The planning began shortly after, turning into a flurry of messages and ideas bouncing back and forth among our family group chat. It struck me then how exhilarating it was to actually be involved, to step out of my old self-doubt and dive into this new role of active participant in our shared family rituals. I volunteered to handle decorations, recalling my knack for arranging flowers and crafting small centerpieces that felt meaningful. The excitement of collaboration sparkled in our exchanges, and for the first time, I felt a sense of belonging in the chaos. As the day of the party approached, I became wrapped up in a flurry of creativity. I remember waking up at dawn, with birds chirping outside my window, my mind already racing with ideas. I gathered twinkling fairy lights, soft pastels of streamers, and, of course, a small burst of blooms that I'd hand-picked from a nearby farmer's market. The actual day finally arrived, filled with laughter, chatter, and the lure of sweet baby scents wafting through the air. I could feel an unmistakable blend of joy and vulnerability wrapping the room in warmth. Right before the guests arrived, I caught a moment with Haley in the dimness of the dimly lit hall. We stood shoulder to shoulder, glancing at the spread we had prepared, a cozy blend of homemade pies, cupcakes, and her favorite herbal-infused punch. "I can't believe how much we've grown," she said, her voice a mixture of joy and sincere disbelief. I remembered the girl who had texted me that I was the best aunt and smiled, thinking about how far we'd come together. As laughter echoed around us, I embraced that knot of emotion in my chest, now a soft reminder of the love that had filled the air between us. At one point during the gathering, I noticed different family members darting around the room, sharing their own stories and discussing the joys and challenges of parenthood. I felt the warmth of connection radiating among us, reminding me that family existed not in the absence of messiness, but rather in the harmonious blend of our differences. This newfound understanding washed over me like a soothing balm. I was now a part of something larger, a precious mosaic pieced together by shared experiences, even the imperfect ones. And when Haley, with her beaming smile and tired, yet blissful eyes, looked at me and mouthed a silent "thank you" across the room, I knew in that moment that I had found my place. I allowed myself to bask in the joy of the moment, letting the worries of my old self flicker away like the glowing light strung above us. There would always be more showers, birthdays, and quiet moments of chaos to share. As I departed that evening, with the scent of baby powder lingering in the air and the laughter of my family still echoing in my ears, I carried with me the knowledge that my role was simply to be there, present and loving, no matter the circumstances. Life, with its beautiful chaos, awaited us all, and I was finally ready to embrace each chapter that lay ahead. I never thought I'd gain clarity from a conversation that boiled down to a simple question: am I the asshole for reminding my mom that she disappeared for 6 years? It all started on an ordinary Tuesday, just after my 22nd birthday, when I received a text from my mom, one that seemed to cascade through the silence we had established over time. "Can we talk?" The message read, punctuated with an ellipsis that left something unsaid, shrouded in tension. After everything, I wasn't sure what talking meant anymore. I'd spent too long trying to piece together the echoes of my childhood. The splintered memories of her absence were like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. She left when I was 14, without a note, without a sign. I remember spending countless nights pacing my bedroom, wrapping the arms of my favorite stuffed animal tighter around my chest as if it could absorb the sadness creeping under my skin, desperately waiting for the front door to creak open and reveal her to me, only, it never did. When she resurfaced 6 years later, it was an awkward reunion. She was different, and so was I. She floated in and out of my life, wearing an expression that oscillated between remorse and urgency, as if she were a ghost trying to tether herself to a world she had once inhabited. We meandered through awkward lunches and tentative conversations, but the weight of what had happened still hung between us like an unspoken wound, raw and unhealed. My friends advised me to make peace with her, to forgive and forget, but the truth was, forgiveness felt like an uphill battle often punctuated by waves of resentment. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching fireflies flicker like tiny memories in the dusk, I felt a surge of boldness. The conversation had ebbed and flowed, and my mom's laughter was light, yet it triggered a memory I thought I could gloss over. "You know, it's strange," I said, almost tentatively, "that you were just gone for all those years." The moment the words spilled from my lips, everything shifted. Her laughter froze, the carefree late summer air turned thick as she turned to me, wide-eyed with surprise. I had never directly confronted her about disappearing, and maybe that was the mistake I had made all along. The evening spiraled into an emotional chasm, her defense mechanisms kicking in with a vehemence I had never witnessed before. She insisted I didn't get it, that nobody understood what she went through, her voice rising and falling like a tumultuous sea. I watched her struggle to articulate what I knew she couldn't, a deep-rooted pain that bubbled beneath her surface. But what I had said pierced through the surface tension of our fragile newfound relationship, rendering her defenses useless. I felt like I had triggered a dormant storm inside her, and while part of me anguished over this, the other fired with a stubborn insistence to be heard. "You left me," I whispered, and with that, the tremor of truth hung palpably in the air. I wasn't sure if I was asking for an apology or for her to acknowledge my pain, but it seemed to matter less than the cathartic release of finally expressing my resentment. After what felt like hours of silence, she finally spoke. "I'm so sorry," her voice fractured like glass, each word laced with the weight of regret. As we both sat in the quiet aftermath, I realized that this moment was a turning point for us, a tentative bridge that flickered with the promise of new foundations. This wasn't an easy reconciliation. I still wrestled with the anger, the abyss of loneliness stretched before me, but it became clear that she, too, was trapped in her own reservoir of regret. Our past was marred, yet the possibility of healing was glimmering at the horizon. Weeks rolled by, each conversation layered with new understanding, moments where I reminded her how difficult her absence was and the emotional scars it left, but she met me with transparency, peeling back her trauma like layers of an onion. Eventually, we crafted a bond riddled not just with apologies but with a shared willingness to confront the realities of our intertwined lives. Though the past couldn't be rewritten, it became clearer that I didn't want to dwell on it forever. Instead, I aimed to look towards what lay ahead and how we could forge a future from the ashes of our fragmented past. In an unexpected twist of fate, my initial question transformed into a catalyst for healing. I found compassion for my own pain, an awareness that understanding can twist miracles out of memories that haunt and separate. In the end, as we walked hand in hand one summer evening, I quietly realized I was not the asshole. I had simply needed to remind her of the truth to reclaim my own narrative and, perhaps, hers alongside it. As I wrap up this story, I can't help but reflect on how dramatically things can evolve. For anyone who stumbles upon this, if you've found yourself in a similar position, don't shy away from the hard truths. Sometimes the path to healing is paved with discomfort and confrontation, and that's not just okay, it can be transformative. Update: a few months later, we still have our ups and downs, but we talk regularly. We even plan family dinners now. It's a work in progress, but losing her taught me the value of open communication. Sometimes, reminding someone of their old self is precisely what you both need to move forward. As I sank into the familiar comfort of my worn-out armchair, I couldn't help but smile at how unconventional our journey had been. In the months since that pivotal moment, a conversation that unearthed years of unresolved pain, I felt like I was traversing a landscape continuously covered in fresh snow, each step unraveling new layers of understanding that had remained buried for so long. My mom and I had made significant strides, but the relationship was far from perfect. We had our fair share of awkward silences and unresolved grievances that seemed to loom over dinner tables like unsettling guests who just wouldn't leave. Yet each time we gathered, a collection of mismatched forks and plates heaped with homemade pasta or tacos, we found ourselves leaning a little more towards one another, laughter puncturing the tension that would have trapped us once. I remember one evening when we decided on Mexican, the warm kitchen filling with the spicy scents of sautéed peppers and garlic. Our conversation drifted to lighter territory. My mom made a joke about how many cooking shows I had watched. I couldn't help but tease back about her questionable interpretation of a taco. She laughed, her face lighting up as she recalled how I had always criticized her less than authentic attempts in the kitchen. The ease of it all was beautiful and yet fragile, like the last leaves of autumn trembling on the branches before winter fully set in. But amid these sporadic bursts of joy, we would still occasionally trip over the jagged stones of unresolved tension. There were days when the memories of her disappearance loomed heavily in the air, unspoken, a reminder of discomfort hanging like a fog. While we made efforts to engage in deeper conversations about the past, she often glossed over the harder parts, and I had to remind myself, sometimes in frustration, that healing doesn't always mean confronting everything at once. I learned this not just from our interactions but from conversations with friends who had similarly tangled familial relationships. Each interaction became a delicate balancing act as I tried to weigh my need for transparency against her apparent aversion to confronting certain aspects of her absence. But deep down, I felt there was a possibility, a gentle pulse of hope amid the chaos, that we could find a way through it together. One rainy afternoon, a few months into our renewed relationship, I was sifting through old family photos while dusting the shelves in my bedroom. I uncovered an image of us, taken during a camping trip when I was about 10. In the picture, we were grinning widely, her hair wild and tousled by the wind, a soft sunlight draping us with warmth. I hesitated, sensing an urge to share it with her, wanting to evoke the nostalgia we avoided, but anxiety wrestled at my throat. What if it prompted an uncomfortable conversation? What if I opened up a door that was best left closed? In the end, a quiet determination won out. I forwarded the image to her, and my heart raced as I waited for her response, uncertain of what would surface. A few moments later, my phone buzzed, a simple reply from Mom, "I remember this day. We should go camping again sometime." The words settled around me like a gentle embrace. In that small, unexpected moment, I realized how essential it was to continue fostering these connections, however tentative. Each memory shared, each laugh exchanged, and even the silent contemplations acted as glue, mending a bond that had once frayed to its breaking point. So we planned several family outings, trips to the park, impromptu movie nights, and yes, even that camping trip, which turned out to be a beautiful disaster with an overzealous raccoon raiding our snacks. Each stumble, each genuine laugh, further loosened the decades of hurt, allowing us avenues of genuine connection. Life isn't simply about resolving conflicts, I discovered, it's about embracing the raw, unfiltered moments of humanity, allowing them to reshape your understanding of each other without losing sight of where you both began. Reflecting on these experiences, I chuckled at how naive I had once been, thinking that confronting my mom about her previous disappearance would be the master key unlocking a perfect relationship. The truth was, we humans seem more like a patchwork quilt made of an array of fabric scraps, each piece significant in its imperfection, stitched together by our experiences, laughter, and the love that survived the storms. And now, as I stood amidst the remnants of our initial unresolved conflicts, I felt a quiet pride swell in my heart. We were moving forward, not flawlessly, but rather with intention and openness, and that's what mattered most. Update: it's been nearly a year since I sent that first photo. My mom finally decided to visit my place for the holidays, a huge step for us both. We tackled all the chaos together, barely burnt cookies, holiday songs we forgot the words to, and moments filled with laughter where unspoken truths only led us closer, like the final stitches in our newly knitted bond. There's still room for improvement, reflections on the past yet to unfold, but although we still have our ups and downs, I hold on to the sheer thrill of discovering that reminding someone of their worth can also truly mean reminding yourself. The holiday season that year felt almost surreal, like stepping into a storybook where you get to rewrite the characters and their fates. As my mom arrived at my apartment, the usual nervous tension that would rise in my chest was strangely absent, replaced instead by a flutter of excitement. She came with a suitcase, yes, but it was filled with more than just clothes. It was packed with a hefty dose of hope. We started off small, greeting each other with hesitant smiles that quickly warmed into embraces that longed for connection. We slid into the kitchen, a realm both familiar and foreign as we attempted to recreate our old family traditions. I remember eyeing the kitchen timer and thinking about how I had to remind her it was okay to laugh at our mistakes, instead of crying over them, like before. The cookies were hilariously imperfect, the kind that would make even the worst baking show contestants proud, yet we tried them anyway, laughing over the half-burnt edges and the slight bitterness of too much cinnamon. As we peeled away the layers of holiday chaos around us, our conversations began to unfurl like the delicate branches of a blooming tree, cautiously at first, but blooming all the same. We spoke of her absence without wading through bitterness. We spoke of my childhood without the weight of unresolved shadows. Each word felt like a brushstroke painting a clearer picture of two flawed and fragile beings who found a way back to each other. The moments were punctuated by snatches of holiday songs, our voices blending in harmony and discord, with the lyrics evading us but our spirits dancing freely. One evening, as we curled up on the couch watching old family videos, tiny glimpses into a world that felt both distant and achingly close, I caught her looking at me, a reflection of tenderness and vulnerability in her eyes. She softly admitted she regretted the years lost, yet I saw a flicker of something else, an understanding that our shared laughter and love had the power to bridge even the deepest divides. Those unspoken truths seemed to shimmer in the air between us, invisible threads weaving a tapestry of renewed trust. She expressed gratitude for my patience, which felt oddly reversed. My heart was grateful too, but for her presence, for her willingness to try anew. Each conversation, each short-lived tiff was a reminder that we were slowly threading together the fragments of our old selves with the new ones we were forging. Evenings turned into long discussions about dreams and aspirations, the soft glow of fairy lights glittering like possibilities in the air. Over dinner, we shared stories of our past and hopes for the future, anchoring our relationship in the open air of vulnerability. I felt a profound sense of comfort, her laughter filling the gaps of silence that had once felt like chasms. Sure, we weren't perfect, and perhaps we never would be, but we were learning to navigate this intricate dance of togetherness again. It was all still a work in progress, but as that holiday faded into memory, something undeniably beautiful emerged, a new rhythm that promised growth, however imperfect it might be. I realized that our bond was like those cookies we made, no longer pristine, but bursting with character, sweetness, and the warmth of shared experiences. It was deeply flawed, yet somehow, perfect in its own way. Reflecting on our journey, I understood that confronting the past was more than just a burden, it was a gift, and through those difficult conversations and tender moments, we both found a semblance of peace in the chaos. This tumultuous journey had changed us profoundly, but as I glanced at my mom, now more a friend than a figure of authority, I embraced the uncertainty of our future, knowing we were weaving a story that was all our own. The hum of chatter filled the classroom, punctuated by the clinking of chairs and the rustle of notebooks, but I was lost in my thoughts, my fingers idly tracing the smooth surface of my desk. My name, Kieran, a beautiful name that held stories of my heritage, was a constant source of comfort for me. It was a reminder of where I came from, my family's roots in India, and the rich culture that shaped my identity. Yet, as I sat there surrounded by my classmates, I could feel the familiar weight of unease settling on my shoulders. Since starting high school in the United States, I had faced the same question from my peers over and over again: why don't you pick an American name? At first, I would laugh it off, shrugging my shoulders as if it were no big deal. But as the months went by, the well-meaning suggestions became more persistent, and I started to dread the conversations. Each request felt like a tiny chip at my identity, a subtle push toward becoming someone I wasn't. One dull September afternoon, the teacher announced a group project. The moment my classmates began to huddle together, brainstorming catchy names for their teams, I felt the tension rise in my chest. I had always been an observer, preferring to listen rather than speak up, but today, something shifted inside me. As the laughter and suggestions bounced around the room, I finally exhaled a deep breath, mustering the courage to say, I don't want an American name. The words wobbled as they escaped my lips, but the room fell silent. I could see the surprise etched on their faces, momentary confusion mixed with pity. My friend Sarah, who had always been supportive, looked at me with wide eyes. Why not, though? It would be so much easier for everyone. Her voice was soft, but I could hear the underlying judgment. Because it's my name. It's who I am, I replied, my cheeks flushing. The room shifted slightly, and I could sense a mix of discomfort and curiosity splashing through the group. I could feel my heart pounding louder, the pressure of their stares weighing heavily on me, but I pressed on. I dove into the significance of my name, explaining the stories my grandmother used to tell me about my heritage, the richness that came with it. I shared how Kieran means ray of light, an embodiment of hope and inspiration in my culture. I felt a strange sense of liberation as I spoke. Perhaps I was finally asserting not just my identity but also my right to it. However, as the excitement of my declaration faded, the reactions shifted. Some classmates nodded along, and a few offered apologetic smiles, but I noticed others exchanging looks of bafflement as if they couldn't fathom why I didn't want to blend in. After class, Sarah approached me, her expression mixed with concern. "I get it, Kieran, but think about it, everyone here has names you can hardly pronounce. Why wouldn't you want something that's easier for us to remember?" Her insistence left me reeling. I had no intention of conforming to someone else's convenience. I felt an emotional surge of frustration mixed with sadness as I realized how hard it was for me to bridge this cultural gap among people I thought I could trust. As the week passed, I found myself pondering the reactions of my classmates, unsure if I had been too confrontational. A lingering doubt settled in my mind about whether I had made the right choice. The struggle became my silent companion, a shadow tugging at the corners of my thoughts. Then one evening, I received a message from Sarah, a simple apology for the way the conversation had turned that day. She expressed that she understood my perspective better now, and while she might not fully grasp my experience, she respected my choice. I felt a warmth wash over me as I read her words. Perhaps I hadn't lost my friends after all. The next day at school, I entered the cafeteria, hesitant about how my classmates would respond. To my surprise, several of them greeted me enthusiastically. "Kieran," they yelled as I walked in. A flicker of disbelief turned into a smile on my face. They had embraced my name, my identity. The earlier tension faded into a past I could learn from, setting the stage for deeper connections. So now, as I sit in this moment of beautiful uncertainty, I can't help but reflect on how vulnerability can carve pathways to empathy. It's an unexpectedly uplifting realization, knowing that my voice carries weight and that my identity is worthy of respect. I learned that standing firm in my truth not only affirmed who I was but allowed others to see me for it, too. Even though there would still be moments of doubt ahead, both about my identity and how it was perceived, I felt ready to embrace the journey. The idea of belonging is complicated, particularly in a world that often insists on conformity. Yet somehow, in carving out space for who I was, I found a flicker of light in the connection we all sought, a shared humanity draped in diverse stories. And perhaps, just maybe, my name was not just a label but a bridge connecting different experiences. Update: a few weeks later, I found out that Sarah started a project on names and their meanings for our school's Cultural Day. She reached out to me, asking if I would share my story and the significance of my name. This unexpected twist rekindled my excitement about cultural exchanges, allowing me to be an ambassador for understanding in our school. As I prepared my presentation, I felt an awe-inspiring sense of purpose swell inside me, reminding me that our names can pave the way for sharing, listening, and ultimately connecting with those around us, encouraging dialogues that burst with empathy and warmth. As the Cultural Day approached, I dove deep into the significance of my name, unraveling the threads of its history and the stories embedded within it. My name, Anais, is rooted in a tradition stretching back to my ancestors, resonating with layers of meaning that felt personal yet universal. I meticulously researched the etymology, the cultural contexts, and even the stories of other individuals who shared the name, finding comfort in the fact that the name was not only mine but a connection to many who walked similar paths before me. Each night, as I reviewed my notes by the soft glow of my desk lamp, I felt the anticipation build. It wasn't just a presentation, it was a chance to turn the tide of misunderstanding and perhaps inspire others to appreciate their own names and heritages. I designed a simple PowerPoint slideshow, featuring images of my family, pictures from cultural celebrations, and quotes that celebrated the beauty of diversity. On the day of the presentation, the auditorium buzzed with excitement. Students from every corner of the world shared their stories, and for the first time, it felt like I was part of something larger. When Sarah introduced me, I noticed her warm smile, and it grounded me in the moment. As I stood before my classmates, I looked out into their faces, many of whom I'd shared fleeting glances with in the past, but never truly connected to. I began by recounting the little anecdotes I had gathered about my family history, how my parents had chosen my name as a way to honor my heritage, and how it had shaped my identity. As I spoke, I could see a ripple of curiosity wash over the audience. Some leaned forward, while others exchanged glances of intrigue. I told them about that moment in the hallway that had unsettled me to my core, about feeling like an outsider simply because of my name. As the truth poured out, I felt an unexpected wave of vulnerability mixed with empowerment. Here I was, shedding my cloak of insecurity. As my presentation progressed, I encouraged my peers to share their own stories, creating a circle of respect and curiosity. One by one, hands raised high, revealing stories of names passed down through generations, and names chosen for their meanings. It became clear that while we were all unique, We also shared the same thread of seeking acceptance and connection that intertwined through our diverse backgrounds. I felt a renewed sense of camaraderie and community blossoming in the room though, which struck a profound chord in my heart. By the time I finished, I felt light, like I had released a burden I didn't even know I carried. The applause echoed, warm and sincere, and rather than purely congratulatory, it felt like a collective acknowledgement of the stories we all carried. In the following weeks, something beautiful began to unfold. My classmates, spurred on by the reactions from the presentation, started greeting each other by their names, spelling them out, sharing their meanings, and listening to each other with an attentiveness that hadn't existed before. It was as if my presentation had ignited a small cultural revolution in our school, a ripple effect of empathy and respect for the stories behind each name. Even Sarah and I grew closer. We chatted about our backgrounds often, a friendship flourishing through our differences. She even asked me to collaborate with her on a poster for next year's Cultural Day, which I happily agreed to. Reflecting on the journey we had taken, I realized that I had found my voice amidst the noise of uncertainty. The way my classmates began to see each other with more warmth, emphasizing real connection over preconceived notions, inspired me beyond words. This experience taught me that names, while they might carry the weight of identity, also bear the potency of understanding when we dare to search for meaning in them. Months later, as I watched friendships blossom and our school become a vibrant tapestry of cultures sharing their truths, I no longer felt like I was on the fringes. I was woven firmly into the fabric of our shared stories. I sometimes wondered what would have happened had I not pushed back at those moments of discomfort, and I knew that those moments had shaped me in ways I would reflect on for years to come. As I settle into bed each night, I feel grateful for the journey and those conversations we shared, threading together a deeper understanding of what it means to be both unique and connected. Update: a few weeks later, I was surprised to receive a message from a girl from another school. She explained how my story had traveled through social media, inspiring her to share her own name and its meaning in her school project. She thanked me for encouraging her to embrace her uniqueness and engage in dialogue about her culture. My heart swelled as I read her words, realizing that this ripple effect was much larger than I had ever imagined. Maybe, just maybe, our names serve not just as labels, but as bridges to a world more understanding and accepting. All we need to do is start the conversation. As her message lingered on my phone screen, I felt a new surge of motivation, a drive that pushed me to think even bigger about how I could spread this message of cultural appreciation and self-acceptance. Inspired by the girl's heartfelt words, I decided it was time to take my presentation beyond just my school. I wanted to open the door for others to share their stories too. I reached out to Sarah, who had ignited this journey for me, and proposed that we host a small event, an evening gathering where students could come together to talk about their names, share their heritage, and explore the significance behind cultural identity. To my delight, she was immediately on board, and we began brainstorming ideas that would make the event not only inclusive but also engaging. We settled on the theme names, our stories, our voices, and decided to create a cozy atmosphere filled with warm lights, cushions scattered on the floor, photos from our homes, and traditional snacks that represented various cultures. As word spread through the school, I placed an open invitation for students from neighboring schools to join us, eager for as many voices as possible to be heard. I poured my heart into crafting my presentation, aiming to highlight how names carry the weight of ancestral history and dreams, and how, through every pronunciation, we flick the pages of a wider narrative that we invite others to read. On the evening of the event, I stood at the entrance, my heart racing as I welcomed the first few students. My nervousness melted away as I noted the diverse faces filled with curiosity and anticipation. Students mingled, exchanging stories and laughter, while I observed a sense of connection weaving through the room, a tapestry made of words and shared experiences. As the gathering began, I took my place in the middle of the room, and as I shared my story, I could see nods and smiles affirming my words. It was a moment of pure magic. Everyone in the room seemed to connect on a level deeper than surface names. We were sharing pieces of ourselves. One by one, my classmates took turns sharing their own name stories, creating an unwavering atmosphere of encouragement. Some spoke of names laden with cultural significance, while others described the journey they'd taken in reclaiming or embracing their identities. I listened, entranced, as a shy boy revealed how his name, once a source of ridicule, now symbolized his family's resilience through generations. The event transformed into something monumental, a mosaic of voices each resonating with a unique timbre, wrapping around me in familiar warmth. As the night wore on, I realized this gathering had not been just an event, it was a reminder of the power we hold in sharing who we are. When it came time to close, I shared a few words of gratitude with the group, my heart full, acknowledging that every name told a story, their stories intertwined like threads in a larger fabric. Every participant walked away wearing not just their given names but also a newfound appreciation for their histories. A few days later, as I walked the school corridors, I couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere had slightly shifted. Conversations buzzed with a sense of openness, and I caught snippets of discussions about the importance of names and their meanings. One girl even approached me, shyly sharing that she had decided to embrace her traditional name instead of opting for a nickname. I felt a sense of pride, witnessing how one evening could spark such meaningful change. It was then that I recognized my voice had the power to inspire others, just as I had been inspired. Months passed, and that one event turned into a series of cultural dialogues at our school. From name stories to sharing family recipes, every gathering became a window into another world, creating a space where students felt seen and valued. It started as a simple exchange about names, but it grew to symbolize an acceptance of the beautiful diversity within our community. Reflecting back, I understood now that it was never merely about defending my name from being changed, it was about embracing identity. Recognizing that our unique stories could carve paths toward understanding. I often think of that girl who reached out to me, knowing that the ripples of our words had the potential to flow far beyond what we could foresee. Thoughtful conversations about names led to deeper connections, and through that, a newfound sense of belonging took root, not just for me, but for many others, transforming our school's narrative into one of diverse elements woven into a vibrant fabric. As I sat at my desk one evening, contemplating the journey, I smiled at the thought, in a world often fraught with misunderstanding, all we truly needed was the courage to speak, to listen, and to share names that encapsulated our history as well as our aspirations for the future. I thought family dinners were supposed to be a happy time, a sanctuary where laughter echoed against the walls and stories were shared over hearty meals. But for us, those evenings had morphed into something altogether different, shadows lurking at the edges of our conversations, wrapping our interactions in unspoken tension. My name is Clara, and I've been married to Tom for 6 years. We have a 5-year-old daughter named Ruby, and while I consider ourselves a loving family, it has become impossible to ignore the growing chasm between Tom's parenting style and my own. I often found myself biting my tongue as I watched him joke with Ruby, unraveling crucial lessons about respect and boundaries into playful exchanges that sometimes skirted a little too close to mockery for my liking. I remember feeling that knot in my stomach every time I saw Tom dismiss her feelings, like the time she fell off her new bike and cried, only for him to ruffle her hair, laughing, saying she was being drama queen. It was that laughter that made me feel like I was caught in some kind of silent storm. Did he really believe it was all a joke? Surely, parenting requires more than a punchline. After months of internal wrestling, trying to bridge our views, I decided, after a particularly difficult week where it felt like every interaction we had ignited a small brushfire between us, that it was time to have an intervention, but one that wouldn't involve an audience. My plan was simple: gather a few close family members who shared my concerns and sit Tom down. The day of the intervention, my heart raced. We hosted the dinner in our cozy living room, filled with the familiar scent of my grandmother's lasagna wafting through the air, an ambrosial comfort I hoped would alleviate the tension. I watched him as he entered, a radiant smile on his face and an easy banter with Ruby. For a fleeting moment, I almost doubted my decision. How would he react to these loved ones sitting there, ominously quiet, gauging his every word? The evening began with laughter and light fare. But I could sense the shift when I introduced the topic with tentatively kind words about how much we all loved Ruby and wanted the best for her. Tom's smile flickered. I was met with a defensive posture, and soon, my family felt the air change as they echoed my concerns. Tom, we've all noticed that sometimes you just brush off her feelings. Each word felt like a landed blow, and I could see his expression shifting from taken aback to outright hurt. As voices intensified, I could feel the thick cloud of resentment settling between us, swirling in my gut. I'd never meant for it to feel like an attack. It should have felt like a caring moment, but watching Tom's eyes narrow, his lips tighten, I wished I could erase the entire evening. What had I done? The room grew quiet, the sound of my own heart pounding dangerously loud in my ears. I could see Tom blinking back something: anger, sadness, or perhaps confusion. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor like nails on a chalkboard, and headed out to the patio. I followed, a mix of dread and regret crashing over me. Was I being an asshole? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He stood against the railing, the moonlight casting a soft glow on his profile. I just want to be a fun dad, Clara, he said, his tone flat but revealing a deeper vulnerability. I didn't know there was a right way to parent. With that, I plunged into an honest dialogue instead of confrontation, revealing my fears of Ruby growing up leniently, of becoming someone who couldn't respect boundaries. As the night unfurled, we both found ourselves sharing more than just grievances. We uncovered fears, doubts we'd both carried throughout our marriage. I think it was then that a shift occurred, allowing us to reach homemade understandings of what it meant to raise our little girl. By the time midnight rolled around and the stars twinkled like distant lanterns overhead, we had come to an agreement. Tom promised to be more mindful of Ruby's feelings, while I vowed to ensure my approach balanced firmness and compassion. There were tears, hugs, and an ache that transformed into quiet laughter, dispelling the earlier tension. Weeks later, we saw noticeable change, not just in Tom's interactions with Ruby, but in how we communicated overall. It wasn't perfect and won't ever be, but now we could openly discuss boundaries, emotions, and even the occasional disagreement, something I'd craved since the beginning. I remember laying in bed that night, watching Tom lose himself in his dreams, not having resolved everything but feeling as if the weight of our misunderstanding had shifted, loosening its grip. It was a step forward, and though we still navigated the stormy seas of parenthood, the conversation gave me hope. As I write this, narrating the poignant moments that brought us closer, I can't help but wonder how many couples sit with their own trepidations beneath familiar stars, all needing just a little intervention of their own to make love thrive amid the chaos. Yet, despite the tentative peace we found in the quiet of our shared space, the feeling of unresolved tension never truly faded, resting just beneath the surface of our conversations. In the days that followed, I could sense the fragility of our relationship. It was like walking on a tightrope stretched high above the chaos of life, our very balance teetering on the edge of unspoken words. I started to find comfort in the routine of our days, the morning rituals of coffee brewing, the sweet scent of pancakes sizzling on a Sunday morning, the soft laughter of our kids echoing through the house while Tom and I exchanged fleeting glances, each one heavy with unarticulated thoughts. Some nights, after the kids drifted off to sleep, I would lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if what we had done was sufficient. Had we truly bridged the gap that had grown between us? Or were we merely placing a bandage over a wound that had yet to heal? Then came the day I found myself sitting in a small coffee shop, fingers wrapped around a warm mug, staring at my phone as I scrolled through a thread on r/AITA about a woman who had confronted her partner about their parenting. I hadn't planned on reading it, I just needed something to occupy my mind while I waited for a friend. But as the words unfolded on the screen, each confession, each struggle resonated deep within me. The comments decried her actions, some labeling her an asshole for creating unnecessary conflict. Others championed her courage, arguing that sometimes the hard conversations needed to happen to invoke change. I closed my eyes and imagined the context, bodies tense with unspoken frustration, a family dinner morphed into a culinary battlefield, emotions laid bare like tender flesh on display. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a real portrayal of what I had experienced, a realization that I wasn't alone in my thoughts, that perhaps I had inadvertently become a part of something larger. Arriving home later that day, armed with new perspectives but still clinging to the husk of my previous fears, I found Tom in the living room, a symphony of plastic toys littering the floor, the kids' laughter filling every corner. I felt a surge of gratitude for those moments, yet apprehension clawed at me from the inside, whispering that our home was both a sanctuary and a battleground. As we settled in for dinner, I picked my words carefully, wanting to engage but withholding a little out of compassion for both of us. I asked Tom how he felt about the kids' evolving behaviors, whether he noticed any shifts in their interactions. His brows furrowed as he chased a piece of broccoli around his plate, a clear sign of internal reflection. Sometimes, I worry I'm not doing enough, he admitted, the weight of his vulnerability striking a chord in me. I know the kids are learning from us, but what if I'm just showing them all the wrong things? As I watched him struggle, my heart ached at the vivid realization of his fears mirroring my own. And just like that, what began as a conversation about our children morphed into us slowly unpacking the expectations we had of each other as partners and as parents, the insecurities revealing themselves line by line. By the end of the meal, we were leaning closer, sharing laughter punctuated with confessions of self-doubt. It felt exhilarating, as if the heaviness of our situation had transformed into something lighter, a buoyancy infused into the atmosphere of our home. Several days later, we found ourselves sitting at the edge of our bed, the dim light of the nightstand casting a warm glow around us as I carefully broached the subject of another intervention of sorts, one that could involve family, a potential gathering of our in-laws and nearest friends to discuss parental roles in a supportive circle. Tom was hesitant at first, reflecting on the past dismissals and misunderstandings we had both endured, but our children's chaotic tendencies soon became the deciding factor. "I don't want to keep pretending we have it all figured out," he agreed softly, the resolve growing between us. "If it helps us, and them, to talk through this, then let's do it." So we did. We arranged for a small gathering that weekend, inviting only those who felt like pillars of our lives, supportive grandparents eager to lend advice and seasoned friends who had navigated similar waters. The night approached with a mix of excitement and anxiety fluttering in the pit of my stomach, and as they began to arrive, I could feel an electrifying energy dance through our home. In the warm embrace of friendly faces, we shared stories filled with laughter and also moments filled with stark reality, unveiling vulnerabilities as a collective group. Conversations laced with compassion drew forth advice, sparking lively discussions that felt refreshing and raw. I discovered that most of us were grappling with the same trials, the weight of expectations sometimes feeling like a heavy cloak we wore unwillingly. And it hit me, this sense of community was what I had craved, not just for my husband and me, but for all of us, feeding into the notion that parenting, like any venture, thrived in the laughter and wisdom shared among friends and family. As the night lingered on, we encircled one another in a way that transformed the situation from an intervention into a celebration of unity. Toasts and cheers echoed through the night as our children fell asleep, the gentle hum of laughter wrapping around them like a lullaby. And as the evening wound down, Tom and I found ourselves seated on the porch under a sprawling moon, the kind of night that felt expansive and eternal. We reflected on the beauty of the conversations and the progress we had made, not just within ourselves but as a couple willing to face the tumult of parenting hand in hand. Now, as I sit here sharing this journey, I reflect on how our night of vulnerability turned into newfound strength. The intervention had morphed into an act of love, revealing that within the chaos of life and the challenges of parenting, our love could still bloom amid all the uncertainty. We may not have it all figured out, but we no longer bore the responsibility of figuring it out alone. As the days turned into weeks, I could feel the fabric of our family life begin to knit itself back together. It wasn't an overnight transformation, rather, it was a slow, deliberate weaving of understanding and partnership. The mornings were still hectic, with our toddler, Max, bursting into our room with the enthusiasm of a small tornado, demanding breakfast and cartoon time before the sun had fully peeked over the horizon. Yet, during those chaotic moments, Tom and I leaned into each other more, sharing exasperated glances that spoke volumes without a word. We learned to tag team the morning madness, with me preparing the scrambled eggs while he poured the milk, together wrangling Max's unpredictable energy. We started finding humor in the fray, laughing off the days when breakfast ended with more cereal on the floor than in his belly, allowing ourselves the grace to be imperfect. In the evenings, we would sit on the worn-out couch, the remnants of our day still hanging in the air, as I would share the snippets of my workday, and he would recount absurd conversations with coworkers that made even the most mundane tasks sound like adventure tales. It was in these moments that I felt the walls we had built around our frustrations begin to crumble, allowing laughter and openness to seep through the cracks. I began to see Tom not just as my husband, but as my companion in this wild journey of parenthood, a navigation through laughter and chaos, mistakes, and small victories. One Saturday, with the sun warming the world outside, we planned a family outing to the local park, our first trip where we both felt equipped to handle Max's energetic bursts together. Tom and I held hands on the way, a small symbol of our resolve amidst the complexities. We shared the simple joy of watching Max run unabashedly toward the playground, his laughter echoing against the lush backdrop of summer. That afternoon was punctuated by sticky popsicles and spontaneous races, and with every shared experience, I felt the uncertainties of our earlier days start to fade into a warm, comforting glow. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, I turned to Tom, who was grinning as he swung Max into the air. It struck me then that our intervention had not only unveiled the cracks in our communication, it had also ignited a deeper understanding of what we could accomplish as a team. It was about pride, shedding the notion that we had to bear our struggles silently, and embracing the messy, beautiful experience of parenthood together. That evening, lying in bed with the laughter and chatter of our lively boys still echoing in my heart, I reflected on everything we had faced. Sure, the journey wasn't perfect, and I knew moments of frustration might still come. Like any couple grappling with the weight of parenting, we'd have stumbles. Yet, we were now armed with somehow a clearer perspective. The intervention hadn't been a merely talking it out session. It had forged an unspoken pact that we would continue nurturing our relationship alongside our role as parents. Our love would not be a casualty of life's demands, but rather a partner in this beautiful, layered tapestry we were creating together. As I lay there, feeling the gentle rhythm of Tom's breath next to me, I reached for my phone to journal my thoughts. I didn't want to forget this feeling, the comfort of knowing he was on my side, that together we were ready to face whatever life tossed our way, however clumsy or chaotic it might be. And in the quiet hum of the night, beneath a blanket of stars, I couldn't shake the feeling that this very moment, marked by vulnerability and hope, was a chapter in our story that I'd always cherish, a reminder that amidst the challenges, love was our anchor. In this swirling world of parenting and partnership, I've come to realize that it's not about having every answer figured out, but rather dwelling in the uncertainty together, trusting that our willingness to communicate would continue to thread our hearts closer. As I drifted off to sleep, a soft smile danced on my lips. Perhaps it was true what they often say, the best conversations often begin from the most unexpected places, and sometimes, in navigating the storm, you find that you're creating not just a loving household, but a depth of connection that makes the journey worthwhile. It started like any other weekend in my cozy apartment, sunlight streaming in through the living room window, casting soft shadows on the walls adorned with my paintings. I'd spent most of the week in my studio, experimenting with colors and textures, lost in a world of creativity that often felt like my only refuge. Art had always been my passion, and with each brushstroke, I poured my heart into every canvas, treating each piece as a personal expression of my inner landscape. My boyfriend, Henry, often remarked how he admired my talent, but I could tell there was a part of him that didn't quite understand the depths of my connection to my work. Whenever he'd come over, he'd inevitably reach for my brush or try his hand at mixing paints, thinking this would draw us closer. I appreciated his enthusiasm, but it often felt like an intrusion. One Saturday afternoon, I was preparing to start a new canvas, envisioning a vibrant sunset that fused fiery oranges with deep purples. It was the kind of piece I desperately wanted to share with the world. As I organized my paints, Henry strolled in with a new set of acrylics he'd picked up from a nearby store. "I thought we could have some fun today," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. I felt a pang of annoyance, but instead of voicing it, I smiled and suggested we hang out first, letting him have the run of my living room with his beginner's brushes. He agreed, and we spent a while chatting, munching on snacks, and throwing paint at some scrapboards I didn't mind getting ruined. But then things took a turn. After seeing me work, Henry casually, almost haphazardly, grabbed one of my larger canvases, the one I had set aside for my sunset masterpiece, and started to cover it with a vibrant green blob. My heart sank as I froze, watching him work. "No, no, no," I whispered more to myself than to him. "That's not. You can't just," but before I could articulate my frustration, he stepped back and said, "Look at that. I made something." All I could see was the destruction of my vision, the piece I had been nurturing in my mind for days, reduced to a chaotic mess of colors that didn't belong. Bitterness seeped through my resolve, and I attempted to explain how important that canvas had been to me, but he just shrugged, a smile plastered on his face, completely unaware of my growing agitation. It felt like a betrayal, and at that moment, I couldn't find the words to convey how hurt I was. The day ended on a strained note, and after he left, I hovered over the ruined canvas, tears pooling in my eyes. I didn't even want to look at it anymore, and something inside me snapped. I rolled it up and tossed it into the trash, almost feeling an odd sense of satisfaction as I did so. But relief quickly morphed into guilt. The next day, Henry asked about it, and I could see the excitement in his eyes as he recalled that moment of impromptu collaboration. I hesitated, my throat tightening as I confessed what I had done. Henry's expression turned from amusement to astonishment. "You threw it away? Why would you do that?" I wanted to scream my frustration at him, explain how he'd ruined something precious, but instead, I felt small. "Because it was mine, Henry. And it meant something to me," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence that enveloped us felt heavier than ever, and he just nodded, looking away. I expected an argument, a confrontation, but instead, we both stood in the fallout of a decision that had felt both impulsive and justified. "You didn't even care about it," he countered quietly, hurt flashing across his features, and in that moment, I realized the different ways we valued art and expression. We didn't see eye to eye, and maybe we never would. That evening, I sat alone in my studio, contemplating my actions. It wasn't just about the canvas. It was about communication, respect for one another's passions, and how quickly love could devolve into misunderstandings. I thought about the work I wanted to do, the emotions that needed to flow, and I knew I had to reach out to Henry, to explain further, to tell him how much his excitement meant but how it clashed with my creative process. As the moonlight spilled through the window, illuminating my untouched canvases, a sense of clarity washed over me. Perhaps that was the lesson in all of this, not just about art but about understanding each other as we tread through our distinct worlds. Our relationship needed open conversations, a commitment to honor each other's spaces. I texted him, asking if we could meet and talk. He replied almost instantly, saying he'd really like that. As I prepared to step into an uncertain but necessary conversation, I was left contemplating whether I was truly the a-hole in this situation, or if we were just two artists in a world that sometimes felt too confined. In the weeks that followed, we learned to navigate our differences, finding a balance between my art and his enthusiasm as we started collaborating on new projects where we could both express our creativity without stepping on one another's toes. The discarded canvas became a reminder of our journey, a testament to the struggles that could end in understanding, and in that rawness, our relationship grew stronger. Sometimes, I still wonder if I should have approached the situation differently, but maybe it was all necessary, a chapter in our story that led to deeper connections, both artistically and emotionally. As I reflect on those days, I find myself smiling at how we transformed our creative chaos into a symphony of collaboration. The discarded canvas, painted with reckless abandon and then marred by unintended destruction, eventually became more than just a victim of frustration. It morphed into a catalyst for growth. It was during one of those late nights, and we sat in our quaint little living room, filled with the smell of brush strokes and oil paint, that I realized how much we had changed. We had taken steps to infuse more understanding into our artistic practices, but more importantly, we were learning to navigate our lives together in a way that felt harmonious rather than combative. I remember the soft glow of our desk lamp casting shadows on the walls, flickering like the moments of doubt and hope that intertwined our stories. I had brought home a few canvases, each one a blank slate, eager to embrace the new chapters we were writing. We decided one evening to create a mural on the large wall in the living room, a combined testament to our growth and a reflection of our journey together. He suggested we blend abstract designs, flowing shapes that could symbolize our individual paths merging into one. The planning was half the fun, brainstorming in the late hours of the night, discussing colors, even arguing playfully about which patterns would complement the other's style. We stood shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by bursting tubes of paint and the remnants of our previous projects, as laughter filled the air with a warmth that made the room feel alive. It was in those moments I felt the cracks of our earlier misunderstandings start to heal, each stroke on our mural reflecting our innate desire to express who we were and what we had fought through, paving a road to understanding. Sure, there were still hiccups along the way, he made a few accidental spills, and I had my share of exasperated sighs, but the atmosphere remained playful and light, filled with the essence of compromise. The mural itself turned out vibrant and chaotic, with swirls of blues and greens colliding but still fitting together in a strange, beautiful way, just like us. Once completed, it became a conversation starter for our friends who came over, a visual representation of our evolution intertwined like threads in a tapestry. Even on days when I felt a shadow of doubt creeping back in, I'd look at that mural, its colors speaking unspeakable truths about our partnership, and a sense of pride would wash over me. Looking back, I see that, while the moment of throwing away the ruined canvas was driven by frustration, it was precisely what we needed to ignite not just a conversation but a whole new dialogue within our evolving relationship. It's intriguing how one little action can spiral into such immense growth, leading to a bond fortified by creativity rather than just love. Sometimes I still wonder about the piece that had been tossed away, what it could have transformed into had we taken a different route. Yet somewhere deep down, I realize that every discarded moment has its purpose, leading us to the vibrant mural on our wall, a tale of understanding that will forever remind us of the beauty found within the chaos of love and art. As the weeks melted into months, I often found myself drawn to that vibrant mural, a collage of colors swirling together in chaotic harmony. It spoke not just of our artistic journey but of our journey as a couple, reflecting every argument and every compromise we had navigated together. Each swirl represented a moment in time, a glimpse into what it meant to truly collaborate and communicate. The eventual blending of our styles created something entirely new, a unique expression that still felt like us but was also something beyond our individual selves. I'd catch myself smiling at it while washing the dishes or during evening chats on the couch, wrapped up in our shared warmth. Sometimes Jimmy would tease me about staring at our masterpiece for too long, claiming I had an obsession. I'd laugh it off, but deep down, I knew he was right. It was a part of our lives now, almost like a guardian watching over our routines. But even as we flourished, I couldn't completely shake off the shadows of that old canvas. There were nights when I would trace the outline of the mural with my fingers, feeling the layers of paint beneath my touch, and I'd remember that first piece, the potential it held and the frustration it had caused. Did I make the right call? Each time that question flitted through my mind, Jimmy would always sense my distractions. "You okay?" he'd ask, setting down his sketchbook and shifting focus onto me, his brow creased with genuine concern. His kindness washed over me like a warm tide, pulling me back from my musings, and I'd reassure him, reminding myself I had to let go of that weight. We continued to bond through our projects, but with every brushstroke we painted together, I also began to see the cracks in my own patience. I was forgiving of his exuberance, but frustration bubbled beneath the surface when he attempted to take creative liberties on my designs. It started innocently enough, a splash of unexpected color on a planned composition, but before long, he would challenge my intentions, suggesting changes that were more reflective of his style than my own, and I found that familiar tension creeping back in. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm orange hues across the room, I stood before our latest piece, a work we had both poured our souls into. Jimmy joyfully suggested one more addition, a bright green streak across the center, and I felt a strange pang in my chest, a warning against complacency. "Maybe we should leave it as is," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but the smile slowly faded from his face. "Why? We could make it even better. We've come this far together," he countered, enthusiasm undeterred, his eyes widening with excitement. But as he painted the bold green, I stared at the disruption, feeling my heart race, bracing against what felt like an impending clash. Memories of the ruined canvas rushed back, and rather than feeling the joy of creation, I was suffocated by the fear of losing my artistic integrity again. "It feels wrong, Jimmy," I finally croaked, forcing the words through a tightening throat. His brush froze mid-stroke, and in that silence, I could almost hear the echo of every previous misunderstanding bouncing off the walls. "What do you mean wrong? I thought we were in this together." The hurt in his voice sent a shiver through me, every word punctuated with raw emotion. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my dilemma. I could either fight for my vision or consider his perspective, pondering the fragile state of our connection. In that moment, I closed my eyes and chose vulnerability. "I'm scared, okay? I mean, look at what happened last time. I don't want to lose control like that again." The walls around my heart began to crumble, and as I opened my eyes, I found him staring back at me, the light reflecting concern on his face. "I get that," he said softly, taking a step back, "but it's not about losing control. This is collaboration, and collaboration means trust. I trust your judgment, and you have to trust mine too." Looking at him, I couldn't help but wonder how this relationship had transformed, how personal this bond had become, an intimate dance between passion and compromise. It was true, I had to let go of the past. I slowly lowered my guard, and instead of shutting him down, I proposed an idea that felt both risky and liberating. What if we painted some smaller pieces together, just as a way to test our balance? If we don't like something, we can always paint over it or let it go. He blinked at me, surprised, and a slow smile crept along his face. "I like that. A fresh start, right?" And just like that, a new dialogue brewed between us. We committed to smaller projects, immersing ourselves in trial and error rather than tangible expectations, opening ourselves to failures but celebrating the little moments of creation. As we painted, the air around us thickened with laughter, music, and a newfound understanding. The mural became a backdrop for our evolving friendship, and each smaller piece that emerged without the weight of overthinking became a splash of relief amidst our artistic memories. A couple of weeks later, as we stood before a series of colorful canvases strewn across the floor, I felt a warmth flood through me upon realizing how far we had come. The shadows of doubt hadn't vanished, but they danced around the newfound light we were cultivating. I knew this journey would continue to challenge us in unexpected ways, but with every stroke, we embraced the beautiful chaos. Even as I glanced back at the mural, I smiled at our past as much as our present. Together, we were crafting art amid the uncertainties of life and love, learning not just to cope with the unknown, but to celebrate it, a vibrant tapestry of joy and growth. And with that reflection warm in my heart, I felt hopeful about what lay ahead, both creatively and relationally. We had found a rhythm woven not just through our art but through our trust, our patience, and our growing love, inching us toward vibrant futures together. It's funny how something you think will be a dream come true can turn into a waking nightmare. That's how I felt the day after my wedding. My friend, Ella, was always the planner among us, organizing everything from birthday parties to community events, so when I got engaged, I couldn't imagine anyone but her by my side to help with the big day. We were close, with years of friendship behind us, so it felt natural to make her my wedding planner. She wanted to do it all pro bono, which seemed generous at the time. But the day itself? It was a beautiful blur of laughter, love, and simmering tension that crept in like mist. Everything had gone mostly according to plan, until I began noticing that her assistant, a whirlwind of energy named Jenna, was acting a little strangely. I brushed it off during the ceremony, attributing her quirky behavior to nerves. Maybe it was just the excitement of being part of a huge event that made her so jittery. However, as the night went on, I kept catching snippets of bizarre conversations and whispered comments. At one point, I overheard her loudly commenting on the decorations, suggesting they were too cheap and wouldn't even match a low-budget prom. My heart sank. My wedding was everything I dreamed of, and here was someone trashing my hard work and Ella's planning. Still, the night was joyful overall, filled with family, friends, and an overwhelming amount of love. However, my euphoria took a nosedive when I saw Jenna lurking near the bar, watching my cousin do a little dance, and behaving like she was secretly filming the moment on a phone. It felt invasive, and I couldn't shake the gut feeling that her behavior was crossing a line. I tried to brush it off, thinking perhaps I was too focused on my wedding to read too much into things, but every so often, I'd catch her tension with Ella, a look of disdain or perhaps jealousy, it was hard to tell. Some distant part of me wanted to confront her directly during the wedding, but I didn't want to ruin what was supposed to be my perfect day. As the wedding came to an end and the guests started to filter out, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I found Ella packing up some of her things and asked her a little hesitantly about Jenna. She brushed it off with a wave, assuring me that Jenna could be a handful but was a good worker. That was the last thing I wanted to hear. In that moment, I felt torn. Should I say something? Should I tell my friend how her assistant had been acting? I didn't want to seem petty or make Ella uncomfortable. After all, this was her friend too, and I didn't want to create unnecessary tension. Yet, the idea of keeping quiet festered within me like a slowly brewing storm. I ended up keeping my mouth shut, thinking it was best to focus on my new life as a married woman, burying the worry instead of voicing it to Ella. But as days turned into weeks, I found my heart growing heavier. I replayed those moments over and over in my mind, feeling guilty for not speaking up and questioning if I had added to the problem by being complicit. Maybe Ella deserved to know what kind of person her assistant was. In the end, I opted for honesty. I called up Ella one night, still hesitant yet resolute to share my feelings. I told her everything, the comments, the looks, and how I felt a little uncomfortable with some of Jenna's actions. There was a long pause on the other end before she finally spoke. To my surprise, she thanked me for my honesty, admitting she had sensed some strange behavior from Jenna too but hadn't fully acknowledged it. Ella even mentioned that she had been having her doubts about Jenna's professionalism well before the wedding. It was a relief to hear that I wasn't imagining it after all. That heavy weight felt lighter on my shoulders. Weeks later, Jenna was let go, and while it felt sad to see Ella lose a friend over a work-related matter, it was also a sense of closure for me, an acknowledgement that I wasn't just overreacting. We spent an evening reminiscing about the wedding, laughing over the little blunders, and what could have gone differently, realizing that even with the hiccups, the day was still beautiful. It also deepened our friendship, solidifying our bond in a way I hadn't anticipated. Ella realized that honesty might sometimes sting, but it's essential in truly maintaining a friendship. As I reflect on that day now, I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Opening my heart to Ella not only alleviated my guilt but also helped her in the long run, protecting her from an untrustworthy colleague. And, as for Jenna? Well, perhaps she was just overwhelmed with the excitement of the day, maybe she was having personal issues that poured into her professional life. I'll never know, and the knowledge doesn't haunt me like it once did. Update: a few months passed, and I was thrilled to find out that Ella had found another assistant, one who was not only professional but actually shared the same values as her. It feels good to see her flourish in her work while also maintaining the beautiful friendship we have. Sometimes, doing the right thing might feel heavy, but it can lead you to unexpected places of warmth and understanding, and for that, I am thankful. As I settled into my routine after that tumultuous wedding, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed not just in my life, but in the lives of those around me. Ella's new assistant brought a fresh energy to her business, vibrant and eager, and it felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The first time I visited her office in the months following my wedding, it was as if I walked into a different world. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating tidily arranged mood boards and colorful swatches that seemed to dance with enthusiasm. Ella buzzed with excitement as she showed me new designs, her passion reignited, and I could tell this new assistant was a source of that spark. I remembered our late-night talks about the pressures of running a business while nurturing personal relationships. Ella had always been committed to both, but that balance hadn't always been easy for her. Now, she appeared genuinely happy, her laughter ringing through the room like music. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of relief that she had found someone who understood not just the business but also her heart. Then came the moment that rooted everything in perspective, a casual dinner with Ella, where the conversation veered from wedding planning to deeper topics of friendship, trust, and vulnerability. We chatted over steaming plates of pasta, and I couldn't resist sharing more about how I felt learning of the difficulties her former assistant faced. I didn't name names, but I told her how important it is to recognize our own limitations. Ella listened intently, nodding in agreement, and when I reflected on how my decision to not confront her about it felt like a burden lifted, a silence fell between us, contemplative and heavy with understanding. Sometimes, we have to be honest with ourselves before we can be honest with anyone else, she said, her tone soft but resolute. At that moment, it dawned on me that both of us were in a continual state of growth. Her journey in the wedding industry had paralleled mine in life. I saw in her eyes the acknowledgement of not just what she'd endured, but also the strength that refusal to judge could offer to another soul navigating their own battles. I felt grateful for the lessons learned and the bonds fortified through the trials. It felt almost magical how one challenge had united us more than ever. Even now, reflecting on that dinner, I am thankful for the open-hearted honesty we shared that evening, the kind that strengthened rather than strained a friendship. Life rolled on, and a few weeks later, I received an unexpected phone call from Ella. She excitedly shared that she had not only secured a deal with a major wedding magazine but had also been invited to speak at an upcoming bridal convention. This was the kind of exposure she had yearned for, a validation of her hard work, and I felt my heart swell with pride for her accomplishment. She asked if I could come along, to support her through what would surely be a whirlwind of networking and creativity. Of course, I said yes, and as I prepared to join her for this new adventure, I realized that sometimes opportunities arrive not just from talent but from resilience. Ella had influenced me to embrace the bumpy roads that come with life, recognizing that though our paths diverged at times, our shared experiences continued to weave us closer. The love stories we create, relationships strengthened in the wake of hardship, remind us of the beauty and vulnerability, of revealing ourselves in the face of uncertainty. As I nestled into bed that night, my thoughts drifted like autumn leaves, floating softly on a gentle breeze of contentment. I was relieved to put distance between the noise of what could have festered into something unhealthy. Decisions made can weigh heavily, but those burdens oftentimes give way to understanding and growth. Gratitude filled the spaces where worry once resided, and I realized that I wouldn't change a moment of what led us here, not just for Ella or her new assistant, but for myself as well. This journey was our own, one where lessons lingered like sweet aftershocks of knowing one another's hearts, a tapestry that reminded me that at the end of the day, honest connections can indeed light the darkest of paths. As the busy season of weddings approached once again, I felt a sense of excitement ripple through me, like the gentle chime of bells heralding a season of joy. Ella and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm, often exchanging ideas over coffee, sometimes brainstorming themes for her upcoming clients, and more often than not, sharing the laughter that only friends can evoke. The experience of the past few months had instilled a deep appreciation in me, not just for Ella's talent, but for the kind of environment she cultivated, a safe space where creativity flowed freely without fear of judgment. Yet, somewhere beneath this warm connection, I felt the echoes of the past brush against my consciousness like a distant storm cloud. There was something unresolved that lingered, a loose thread that I had intentionally hoped to forget amidst all the good fortune that followed. One afternoon, as we sat across from one another in our favorite cafe, a quaint little place draped in soft sunlight, Ella shared the story of her new assistant, Mia. "You know," she started, a soft smile tinging her lips, "Mia is incredible. She brings such a fresh perspective and always shows up with these brilliant ideas." I could see the sparkle in her eyes, an unmistakable sign of her blossoming happiness, and I felt a swell of joy for her. But as she recounted the talents and quirks of her new partner, a subtle sense of guilt crept into my heart, mingling with the joy like shadows playing hide and seek. The shadow came from my own truth, the worry that I had once inhabited Ella's world with unnecessary honesty, one that had felt painful yet liberating at the time. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to push the weight of my past thoughts aside, focusing instead on the laughter-filled conversations we shared. But that guilt persisted, whispering in the recesses of my mind until it became a familiar companion. One evening at home, with a quiet rain drumming softly against my window, I found myself reviewing the events of my wedding day, desperately concerned with the idea of keeping the past hidden in the shadows. Maybe Mia was exactly what Ella needed. She deserved a supportive environment, free from past tumult. My heart wrestled with the dilemma: would I be the asshole for expressing my concern as a way of protecting her? I knew I couldn't carry this weight anymore without sharing. It felt almost like a betrayal not to mention it, especially considering how open our friendship had become. The next day, during our regular meet-up, I mustered my courage and broached the subject, carefully weighing my words. "Ella, can we talk about something a little sensitive?" She paused, her smile wavering slightly, and I felt the tension stretch between us. I took a breath, viewing our friendship as a brick wall I never wished to disrupt. "I need to tell you about your last assistant. What happened at my wedding?" It wasn't an easy confession. The words clung to my throat like fog, but another part of me, the part that knew the weight of honesty, pushed through. Ella listened intently, her eyes widening as I recounted the moments, the way her assistant's stress had flared that particular day, how it had transferred into her actions, the anxiety it cultivated. I spoke of the raw emotions, the purported things I'd seen slip into the undercurrents of that day. I was at once terrified and relieved, her silence pressing against me as I finished my tale. Her face softened into what I interpreted as a blend of surprise and contemplative understanding. "Thank you for telling me," she finally said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing behind her eyes. I had no clue. In that moment of vulnerability, I could see the bricks of mistrust begin to crumble, not just in her eyes, but within my own heart. Ella wasn't angry, she was grateful for the truth, understanding that honesty had the power to reshape her path, just as it had for me. Days passed, and we continued our friendship, but something felt lighter. Although Ella had faced discomfort upon learning the truth, it became a catalyst for her to engage in deeper conversations with Mia, ensuring they shared the same goals and values moving forward. I watched from the sideline as she addressed the situation with grace and assertiveness, flourishing in a new cohesion with her assistant. Eventually, I learned that sometimes, sharing our burdens can cultivate deeper trust, that connection can blossom in the spaces carved by honesty. It confirmed what I'd always known: sometimes, carrying a piece of the past into the light allows it to serve as a foundation for something new, illuminating paths once cloaked in shadows. What transpired brought forth more gratitude than I could ever have anticipated, for not only had I deepened my friendship with Ella, but I had also empowered her journey, a beautiful symbiosis of care and clarity where once lay uncertainty. As I reflect back on this intricate journey we're still navigating together, I see how the vulnerability stitched together our stories, binding us in ways I never would have predicted. The best part of this realm of friendship was knowing we stood beside each other, carrying the lessons of yesterday into a hopeful tomorrow, knowing that at the end of the day, it is the relationships we carefully tend to that create warmth and wisdom. Perfectly illustrated in the gentle hum of our interactions and the robust tapestry of our lives woven together. It was a quiet evening when I sat down at my kitchen table, the faint smell of roasted vegetables still clinging to the air, a comforting reminder of the dinner I had enjoyed alone after a long day. I was scrolling through my phone when a message from an acquaintance, Anna, popped up, asking if she could come over for a casual get-together. My fingers hesitated over the screen, thoughts racing back to a party last month where Anna, with her bright smile and bubbly personality, made a bombastic introduction that was quickly overshadowed by her confession. She referred to herself as a total klepto. At the time, I had chuckled along with the other guests, brushing it off as a quirky exaggeration, but her subsequent actions raised hair on my neck. I watched, uneasy, as she slipped a bottle of wine into her bag and, just before leaving, rifled through my collection of vintage postcards while distracted by conversation. I knew I should have said something then. It would have been a golden opportunity for a teachable moment, but the laughter of friends masked my instincts as I let it slide. Now, as I read her message, I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I typed a hesitant response, explaining that I had plans for the weekend and wouldn't be able to host her. Each word felt like a half-truth, a feeble wall I was trying to erect against an uninvited chaos. After sending it, I sank into an uneasy silence, replaying the moment she had look of glee when she thought no one was watching, a sort of childlike delight in taking things that weren't hers. The truth was, I didn't want that kind of energy in my home, a space I had worked hard to make a sanctuary. I loved the little treasures I had collected over the years, the mismatched teacups, the faded photographs, and the mere idea of them being subject to her klepto nature made me shudder. Days passed after my refusal, but the unease lingered like an unwelcoming guest. Our mutual friends began to ask about my decision. They wanted to know why I hadn't invited Anna, often couching their questions in a concern that felt almost mocking, as if I were the unreasonable one who had denied a friend simple hospitality. "It's just a joke, you know?" one of them remarked, laughter dancing at the edges of his voice as we stood by a fruity punch bowl. "You can't take it seriously." But I couldn't shake off the feeling. I started to wonder if I was being a bit too harsh, a bit too closed off, yet I felt the sting of their laughter in a way that didn't match my situation. Then came a text I hadn't anticipated. Anna reached out to me again, this time apologizing for her past behavior and inviting me to discuss it over coffee. A part of me wanted to engage, to hear her thoughts and perhaps offer her the understanding I had assumed she lacked. Yet another part remained on guard, caution spilling into the forefront of my mind, warning me of potential manipulation. I chose ambiguity, suggesting that we meet in a public space, something casual, allowing me to maintain the physical distance my heart craved. When the day came, we met in a quaint little cafe, the air thick with the smell of freshly baked pastries. Anna walked in, her demeanor had shifted, the confidence seemed tempered by uncertainty, her usual flamboyance stripped down to a fragile humility. She ordered a latte, and as our small talk veered into deeper waters, I found myself listening intently, her eyes pleading for comprehension, her remorse tinged with vulnerability. She spoke of her addiction, her battles with impulse control, her admission that the label klepto was more of a coping mechanism than a joke. I felt my own walls begin to crack, an understanding blossoming within the fissures of my guarded heart. It became evident that her light-hearted banter often masked a turbulent history, a story that I hadn't anticipated digging beneath the surface. I left that meeting not with a resolution but with a renewed sense of compassion towards someone I had judged too quickly. Maybe I wasn't the asshole after all, but perhaps I was merely wrapped in the confines of my own fears. Eventually, as I navigated my way through my own thoughts, I decided to reach out again. I recorded a message for Anna, saying I'd like to try again, inviting her for a small gathering with a few close friends. It felt right, a balance of caution and empathy, a tentative step toward bridging the space I had drawn between us. Several weeks later, I would look back at that moment of choosing to create a connection rather than a rift. I realized something profound about people. We are all carrying unseeable burdens, and sometimes, understanding is the most potent remedy we can offer. Update: a few months have passed since our reconnection, and Anna has slowly proven herself to be a dear friend, one who respects my space and has taken steps toward managing her impulses. She even surprised me at my birthday party with a thoughtful, hand-picked gift from my favorite bookstore, something I never would have thought possible when the conversation first unfolded in that cafe. As it turns out, both our experiences shaped a new port of calm in the stormy seas of uncertainty. It had reminded me that sometimes the most unsettling moments can lead to the strongest of bonds. As I reflect on the months that have passed since that pivotal decision, I can't help but marvel at how far Anna and I have come. There was a time when the thought of letting her into my life again felt risky, as if I were teetering on the edge of a cliff. It was easy to envision scenarios where her past tendencies would rear their heads, leading to a cascade of mistrust and awkward moments. However, I've come to understand that letting her in required a vulnerability I hadn't expected to offer, not just to her, but to myself. With each casual meeting, be it over coffee at our favorite little cafe or an impromptu movie night at my place, I noticed the subtle shifts. In our conversations, the laughter now echoed with a reserved familiarity rather than tension and caution. Anna sincerely worked on herself, eagerly sharing her progress and the strategies she was implementing to curb her impulses. Each time she showed up with a new accomplishment or insight, my heart melted just a bit more, swelling with awe for her courage and determination to change. One evening, as we curled up on my couch with blankets piled high and an array of snacks scattered around like a makeshift feast, our laughter filled the room, mingling seamlessly with the soft glow of the lamp casting golden shadows on the walls. It felt like home in a way I had nearly forgotten, a sanctuary where two people could be honest about their flaws without fear of judgment. I remember teasing her about her initial tendency to swipe something, a fine-looking postcard or a quirky pen, when she got overly excited. She playfully rolled her eyes, recounting a story about a time she had unintentionally taken an unusual clay figurine from a friend's house, only to return it a few days later, embarrassed and ashamed. We both laughed, and it struck me how that shared moment of vulnerability forged an even stronger connection. Her self-awareness illuminated a warmth in my heart. It was during one of those cozy evenings that I proposed we visit her old neighborhood, the neighborhood she had grown up in, just to see how things had changed. To my surprise, she agreed. As we strolled through the familiar streets, Anna pointed out buildings and shops, relaying stories from her childhood that were both endearing and bittersweet. There was a sense of nostalgia that enveloped us, and I could feel a deeper understanding blooming between us as we walked under the fluttering leaves of the trees lining the sidewalks. Anna spoke vividly about her dreams and aspirations, the very ones that had often been stifled by her earlier behavior, and in that moment, I glimpsed a new layer of her, the possibility of uncharted horizons, a future reshaped by newfound accountability. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Just last week, while I was out running errands, I received a frantic text from Anna, sharing how she had just been at a local busy store and felt drawn in by the rush of excitement, a familiar tension brewing within her. I could sense her panic through the screen as she admitted having slipped a decorative mug into her bag, her heart racing as she navigated the ethics of her actions in real time. My stomach twisted, I felt a flash of empathy mixed with fear. Part of me worried, was this my fault for encouraging her too much too quickly? Only moments passed before my phone buzzed again, and I read her message thanking me for being there. She confessed that when she reached her car, panic bubbled up inside her, urging her to overcome the old impulse, yet this time she chose differently. She pressed her palm against the mug, emerging as the person she aspired to be, her pulse steadying as she marched back inside to return it. I felt endless pride for her courage, and it served as a pivotal reminder of why I let her back into my life. Now, as I sit here reflecting on our journey, I realize how beautifully intertwined our lives have become. While Anna may carry the label of a total klepto in moments of levity, she is so much more than that one chapter. She is a testament to resilience, transforming an unsettling part of her identity into a space of growth and self-awareness. And who she is now, the person she has become, inspires kindness and connection in ways I genuinely didn't believe possible. Perhaps in forging a connection based on our mutual struggles, we inadvertently carved out a bond that scaffolded our souls in the chaos of living. As I look ahead, I can't help but feel curiosity for what lies down this uncharted path for us. Whatever it may be, together, we are embracing it. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting often on that crisp autumn day when Anna sat across from me in the little cafe, her admission hanging in the air like a caustic perfume. I had braced myself for the storm that conversation could have unleashed, but instead, it had gently nudged open the door to an unexpected friendship. One chilly evening, as golden leaves swirled around outside my window, Anna and I sat curled up in my living room, a stack of books scattered between us, the soft glow of fairy lights illuminating the cozy space. We were laughing about our most recent adventure, her brave decision to swap out her usual baked goods for fruit and nuts at a local market, a small victory in her ongoing journey of self-regulation. Each jest carried the weight of our shared laughter and love, a testament to how far she had come since our initial meeting. I watched her, marveling at the way her eyes sparkled with pride at her choices, something I often found myself nurturing in her as she shared anecdotes about her past mishaps. It was strange to think that just months prior, I had been wary of her presence, needing to protect my own space from the chaos of her admitted kleptomania. Yet here we were, two souls in tandem, navigating the bumps of our own imperfections. In the quiet moments, I could feel vulnerability wrap around us like a warm blanket, stitching together the tearing seams of our uncertainties. We talked about the moments that had defined us, her experiences reflected in mine, and it became clear that both of us had worn masks before finally discovering a safe haven in each other. There were still echoes of the past, rumblings beneath the surface that reminded us of our journeys. Sometimes, I would catch a flicker of darkness clouding her face, a shadow of temptation that whispered if only it could persuade her just once more. But instead of fear, I felt a rush of empathy swell inside me. I had seen her taking strides, how she carried around little reminders of her commitment, like a bracelet that she fidgeted with during tense moments, a grounding anchor amid her chaotic thoughts. These days, her voices of the past had transformed from torturous howls into whispered echoes of encouragement. We had both come to recognize that acceptance doesn't mean surrendering to our flaws, but rather, learning to dance with them amid the music of life, struggling less against the rhythm and finding our own beat. With every passing day, curiosity about our future mingled with uncertainty, a blend of excitement and trepidation that accompanied me whenever I thought of where this connection might lead. We began exploring new hobbies together, pottery classes that left our hands muddied yet creative, bookshop visits where conversations would tumble into the air like soft whispers. Each activity strengthened our bond, and it became increasingly hard to imagine my life without Anna's infectious laughter. One balmy winter evening, as we sat close in front of the flickering fireplace, our shared warmth seemed to wrap around us like the flames dancing in the hearth. Anna turned to me, her voice quiet but steady. "You know, I've learned so much from you, not to be afraid of the messy parts of our lives." I found that I had learned just as much from her, how authentic friendships could coax us out of our hidden corners and inspire bravery where we once only felt fear. It was then I realized what we were building together was not simply companionship, it felt like crafting a safe haven, a gathering point for two afraid hearts trying to rewrite their narratives. Still, as thoughts of what lay ahead lingered in the back of my mind, I understood that even within this sea of calm, the tides could shift with the slightest change. Our bond felt strong, almost etched in stone, yet challenges were part of life's intricate design, woven delicately into each sunset. As I nestled deeper into the warmth of our moments like these, I recognized that every twist in this journey would further color our story, each chapter rich with experience, growth, and perhaps an occasional storm. Yet through the tempest, I felt a newfound certainty that, no matter what, Anna and I were committed to weathering it together, brave enough to embrace whatever was waiting around the corner. No, sleep, all my childhood bedrooms had something in common. Only now that I live alone did I realize what that was. The first time I noticed the peculiar pattern was when I stood in the center of my new apartment, a modest one-bedroom tucked snugly into the heart of the city. It was a place of my own, yet it felt eerily familiar. The walls were painted soft beige, the floor a warm wood, and the gentle hum of the city outside filled the air like a nighttime lullaby. But as I unpacked boxes and hung up my belongings, it struck me, every bedroom I had ever occupied as a child had a specific element that seemed to echo through the years. Each space had a window that faced the exact same direction, southeast. I remember as a kid, lying in bed and staring out at the clouds shifting colors as the sun set, thinking that the universe was painting portraits just for me. However, something darker lurked behind those windows, a feeling that so many moments of joy were teetering on the edge of something menacing. My parents divorced when I was 10, and I began to wonder if perhaps it wasn't just a coincidence. As my mind wandered down those troubled lanes of memory, images flashed through my mind, that old, decrepit house we lived in after the split. The peeling wallpaper, the creaky floorboards, and especially the shadows that danced in the corners whenever the sun dipped low. I could almost hear the whispers in the dark. They became companions during sleepless nights, always promising to help me, while making it clear that their comfort came at a price. With each move to a new bedroom, the shadows seemed to follow me, lurking closer each time. At first, I thought them just figments of my imagination, remnants of childhood fears stemming from my fragmented family life. Now, in my own space at 30, the memory was no longer vague. As I stood by that southeast window, I could feel a chill creeping along my spine, as if I were being beckoned back into the heart of those tales I had tried so desperately to forget. I dismissed it as mere nostalgia, but then came the whisper, just faint enough to trick my mind into believing it was just the wind rustling the trees. "Come play," it said, a sweet lilt that was both inviting and gut-wrenching. My hands trembled as I decided to leave my safe haven for the evening air, hoping some fresh air would ground me. Just outside, the world was alive, families, couples, friends all bridged by laughter as they mingled in the twilight. But even in a crowd, I felt wrapped in a blanket of loneliness. After a few minutes of walking, I turned and headed back to my apartment, to gather my thoughts and clear my head. The whole way home, I noticed those same wild shadows clawing at the edges of my vision, just as they had in my youth, edging closer with every step. Upon entering my small space, the silence suffocated me, every creak of the floorboards echoing in a way that made me feel less alone yet completely abandoned. I walked over to the window, the familiarity wrapping itself around me like an old coat, and realized that I was still that lonely child, trying to make sense of the world while seeking solace in forgotten corners. In an impulsive act, I decided to pull the curtain wide open, letting the moonlight spill into the room. To my shock, my heart raced at a sudden movement outside. The shadows, once whispers in the corners, pooled just beneath the window in unearthly shapes, tantalizing me with nostalgia and secrets I had long ignored. My pulse quickened, and I thought of all the times I had ignored the signs throughout my life, closing the doors on thoughts that summoned dread but also hinted at discovery. In that moment, I felt at the precipice of something monumental, a challenge to confront my past rather than flee from it. But instead of fear, I felt liberating curiosity, inviting those mysteries back into my heart. I placed a hand over the glass, feeling that odd mix of warmth and chill as I whispered softly, "What do you want from me?" The response was a gentle swell, the shadows dancing closer as if inviting me to join them. Here I was, finally ready to embrace all that I had avoided for years. About a week later, as I still sat enveloped by those night whispers, I caught a glimpse of a memory, a dream I used to have of running through an endless field, with children playing and laughing without a care. Those memories shifted like sand in an hourglass, forming new shapes in my mind. I began writing them down, detailing everything, every whisper I heard, every touch I felt in the corners of my rooms, and eventually, the truth emerged. Those shadows, which had once loomed over me as dark memories, were reminders of a childhood filled with magic. I had hidden from my feelings for far too long, but now, I was ready to turn every belief I held about my past upside down. That playful call to come play wasn't about fear, it was about reconnecting with that part of me I had buried under the weight of adult responsibilities and heartache. The closer the shadows danced, the more I saw them as potential and promise rather than threats. And like any good story, the shadows remained ever present, threading the past with my future, allowing me to weave together a narrative that made sense at last. That revelation breathed new life into my heart as I embraced the space I called home, a sanctuary full of the joys I had once known. Yet, as I finally snuffed out the light late one night, I felt a stir of energy, a soft rustling brushed against my skin. Just by following the path back to the shadows of my childhood, I discovered that they weren't gone, they were always there, waiting for me to acknowledge them, ready to share those deep, sweet secrets once again. It turns out, every childhood bedroom could be sanctified in a way if we dared to listen to the stories echoed within them. Update: I've since taken up writing again, turning my childhood tales into stories I share online. The response has been overwhelming. It seems I wasn't the only one who carried these shadows, but I've come to realize that my words breathe life into them. A small community has formed around my confessions, each of us unraveling our own histories and discovering shared experiences in those whispered moments of fear and joy. What I once thought was a burden has now become a gift, a testament to the power of storytelling and the bonds it can forge between those who dare to listen. As I sat in my dimly lit room, the soft hum of my computer the only companion aside from the shadows that danced joyfully along the walls, I began to sift through the memories that had shaped my childhood, memories that were now spilling onto the screen like ink from a well-used pen. With each tap of the keyboard, I felt a comforting release, a connection to those childhood bedrooms that had been more than just spaces where I slept. They were vessels holding pieces of my spirit, echoing with laughter, tears, secrets, and fears. In each one, there was something eerily familiar, a strange presence that, until recently, I hadn't fully acknowledged. My first room in the house on Maple Street had been the brightest, painted a cheerful yellow that caught the morning light just right, but underneath that sunny veneer, I had felt eyes watching me, always lurking in the corners where shadows mingled with stuffed animals and forgotten toys. Then, there was the small bedroom in the apartment my family moved to when I was 8, where in the middle of the night I would hear whispers from the closet, like a conversation between old friends, secrets shared only in the dark. I thought I had simply been imaginative, that I was a child prone to flights of fancy. But as I delved deeper into my past through the stories I shared online, my fellow storytellers confessed similar experiences, echoes of their own childhoods that mirrored mine, all rooted in similar anxieties and lonely nights. It began to dawn on me that perhaps what I perceived as specters of my past were, in fact, manifestations of the fears and growing pains all children experience but often bury as they transition into adulthood. Slowly, this realization morphed into a kind of solidarity among us, a shared space where we could explore our fears without judgment, where vulnerability became our strength. Each story prompted reflections on what those rooms meant to us, not just as childhood havens, but as the first steps into understanding ourselves. I vividly remember one night, typing away late into the serenity of solitude, when a particular message popped up on my screen. It was from a fellow storyteller I had come to admire, someone who wrote with a raw honesty that resonated with me. They spoke of the first time they had seen their own shadow reflecting back at them, a friend who, at first glance, felt like an intruder in their own world. Those words struck a chord. It was as if they had pulled from my own diary. We engaged in a conversation that stretched into the early hours, exploring our connections to those rooms, and the peculiar comfort we derived from the understanding that we were never truly alone, even in our darkest moments. This exchange ignited a spark, pushing me to dig even deeper into my psyche. I began to write not only about fear but also about joy, about the afternoons spent building blanket forts, the discovered wonders of an old book collection, and crayon-scribbled maps of imaginary worlds. I painted my childhood in colors more vibrant than the dismal shadows I had clung to for so long. These explorations led to unexpected revelations, and I started to realize my last bedroom before leaving for college was surrounded by a spectrum of feelings, excitement for the future mixed with anxiety for the unknown. The presence I felt there was different, a comforting whisper reminding me that it was okay to stand on the brink of adulthood and still carry the echoes of childhood behind me. When my stories turned into a kind of catharsis, I knew I had stepped past the threshold of nostalgia and into the realm of acceptance. Writing transformed into an affirmation of who I was and who I was becoming, a journey shared with others facing their own darkness and light. As I closed my laptop one night, I felt a gentle weight lift from my chest, a knowing that those rooms, those intangible specters that had haunted my thoughts for years, were simply parts of my story, pieces of a puzzle that I had now started to reshape. Each echo was no longer a reminder of fear but a testament to my resilience and growth. I felt empowered, not just for myself, but for others who found solace in our shared experiences. It was in this space, I realized, that the shadows didn't just watch, they listened, and with every word we shared, we grew a little lighter, a little braver, and a little more human. I wouldn't trade this journey for anything, and perhaps what I had once feared was not about what watched me, but about what I could accomplish when I allowed my story to take flight, merging memory with creativity, and uncovering the beauty that lived beneath the surface. And as the world outside grew darker, I felt a comforting glow radiating from within, reminding me that perhaps, in every bedroom, past, present, and future, there lives a piece of me, a part of my journey that is always worth sharing. With each tale I wove, I found myself diving deeper into the shadows of my past, peeling back layers I had long buried under a facade of normalcy and routine. I reminisced about the tiny rooms that housed my childhood dreams, the way the yellow wallpaper in my first bedroom seemed to sigh in relief whenever I would tell stories to the pastel stuffed animals that adorned my bed. I would drape my childhood fears over those walls, and in return, they whispered back with every creak of the floorboards and soft rustle of the curtains. As I would often confide in those inanimate listeners, I gradually realized that these stories were as much for them as they were for me, a way to channel my feelings into something tangible. Yet, as an adult, I often felt cut off from that magical space where imagination thrived, especially when overwhelmed by life's relentless grind. But now, in sharing my words online, it felt as though I was invited back into that sacred place, offering not just a glimpse of my heart but an open window for others to peer through and find a reflection of their own experiences. Each post sparked a flurry of comments, confessions from strangers who echoed my childhood fears, narrating their own encounters with flickering shadows and lingering feelings that refused to be silenced. Sometimes they were lighthearted, and sometimes they struck chords that reverberated deep within, each interaction nurturing a community that felt like magic, a comfort I'd long sought. One night, as I sat under the soft light of my desk lamp, tapping away with eager fingers, I came across someone who stood out among the rest, someone named Eli. Eli shared that he lived alone in a small studio apartment, much like mine, and like me, had begun to feel haunted by the echoes of his childhood bedrooms. He spoke of how he had a relentless cycle of dreams, the same dream where he was a child again, lost in his old house, searching for something he could never grasp. His dreams always left him feeling hollow in the morning, soaked in a longing he couldn't articulate. I felt an immediate bond with him, his vulnerability resonated with my own hidden struggles. Without hesitation, I replied, fumbling for the right words to let him know he wasn't alone in this surreal experience. The conversation blossomed, with late-night exchanges that turned into shared late-night writing sessions. We grew closer, our narratives intertwining like vines climbing a forgotten wall, feeding each other's flames of creativity while pulling back the curtain of despair together. But it was one Saturday, while we were video chatting, that Eli revealed something that would change everything. With a trembling voice, he asked if I had ever felt a palpable presence in my childhood homes, something that felt as alive as the stories we shared. I paused, recalling late nights spent laying wide-eyed under the covers, where I felt I was not truly alone, a comforting presence lying just beyond the threshold between sleep and waking. A shiver cascaded through me as I said, yes, watching the flicker of recognition spark in his eyes. He confessed that his dreams often felt less like nightmares and more like invitations, urging him to return to the house he grew up in, a space laden with secrets and whispers. We shared stories of our childhood rooms, Eli's walls plastered with the praises of his ever-watchful parents, mine holding the scars of the imaginary beasts that lurked just out of sight. That night, a thought lingered in the back of my mind, and it took root. The more we talked, I had considered visiting my childhood home, hoping to illuminate the dark corners, not just to confront what lay concealed there, but to embrace the memories I had long deemed burdensome. As I floated the idea to Eli, I was surprised by how fervently he urged me to do so. "What if," he said, "there's something there waiting for you? Something that could provide answers?" After a long drive filled with uncertainty, I arrived beneath the familiar roof that once enveloped my childhood with love and dread. Darkness had settled into the night, casting a thick, oppressive air over the house. Each creak of the wooden floor was a reminder of the secrets it had held for decades. I walked into my old room, small, anachronistic, but powerful in its ability to resonate with the echoes of old laughter and sadness. I spoke aloud, recalling memories with the fervor of someone yearning for connection, thanking the walls for housing my dreams and fears. It was then that I felt a warmth, a flicker in the air, and as I closed my eyes, images flooded my thoughts, moments stitched together in a vibrant tapestry of joy, and a few dark threads of shadowed apprehension. But what struck me most was not the fear, but rather the love I felt for that sacred space, and for every version of myself that had passed through it. I closed my eyes, embracing the poignant tranquility that blanketed the room, and allowed myself to remember the promise I made long ago. I would not let fear constrict my voice. When I opened my eyes again, tears brimming with both sorrow and gratitude flowed down my cheeks. Standing there, I understood that in confronting my past, each bedroom and each story, I had reclaimed my narrative. As I returned to my apartment, fortified by this experience, I sensed the presence of something greater, a palpable connection not just to my own story, but to Eli and our blossoming community, a space where we all chose to share the dreams, fears, and beauty of our pasts. And as I sat to write that night, the glow from my desk lamp a soothing reminder of the warmth we all craved, I knew that every story shared only expanded the reach of our collective imagination. My past wouldn't confine me, it would nourish my creative spirit, urging me to dance with shadows and find the light, to remind all who listened that together we could illuminate the darkness, painting a bridge from our childhoods to the present, a bridge wrapped in the threads of storytelling, making us a little lighter, a little braver, and forever connected. It all began one breezy afternoon, the golden light softly washing over my living room as I contemplated the simple yet profound rules that shaped my family dynamics, rules I had never quite realized would lead me down a rabbit hole of conflict and introspection. I had always treasured the close bond we had with my mother, a relationship built on love, memories, and the occasional clash of strong wills. But one evening, as my 8-year-old daughter, Alice, casually referred to my mother as honey during dinner, I felt a jolt, a dislocation of sorts within my heart. To most, this would seem harmless, a term of endearment seamlessly woven into the fabric of family life. To me, however, it opened a floodgate of unresolved emotions. I grew up witnessing my mother's complicated lifestyle, riddled with bouts of neglect and fierce independence that often made her more of a friend than a caregiver. I never questioned the absence of authority in her role, and yet, hearing Alice call her honey felt like an invitation to intimacy that my mother had not earned, a privilege I feared she would abuse. As the days rolled on, I wrestled silently with my feelings, peering into the depths of my mother's approval-seeking behavior, a pattern that had burned me time and again. I decided it was time to set boundaries that would shield my children from the unpredictability of her affection, and so I told Alice, "Sweetheart, it's not okay to call Grandma honey. Her name is Grandma." For Alice's naturally curious and sensitive nature, this prompt seemed a perplexing riddle. Her eyes brimmed with confusion, and I instantly felt a twinge of guilt. Yet I knew this was one of the only ways I could protect my children from the emotional instability that lurked beneath my mother's charming exterior. I imagined possible scenarios, Alice running to her honey for comfort, only to have those sweet moments twisted into half-hearted fits of affection that would leave her confused and wounded. That alone rearranged the pieces of my heart as I guided my daughter to navigate relationships with care. Yet, my gentle restrictions, which I viewed as necessary, did not sit well with my mother. She confronted me during one of our weekly calls, her usually warm voice growing strident as I could tell her feelings were hurt. "Why can't my grandchildren call me what they want?" she asked, her emotional undertones thickening the air between us. I felt compelled to defend my position, explaining that I wanted to maintain clear boundaries for their well-being, citing a few painful memories from my childhood that felt necessary to share. Instead of understanding, however, my revelations only fueled her resentment, breeding a kind of animosity that I had hoped to avoid. "You think you're protecting them," she snapped, "but all you're doing is pushing me away." Caught in that tsunami of emotions, the guilt over distancing my children from their grandmother and the insistence on maintaining their mental health, I found myself questioning whether I truly was the villain in this tale. Days passed, with tension hanging palpably in the air, until, one evening, my husband offered insight that struck a nerve. "You're just creating a cycle," he said softly, prompting a cascade of realizations. In my zeal to protect my children, I had inadvertently mirrored my mother's behaviors, shutting her out just as she once shut me out. As the weeks rolled into months, I let go of my rigid stance and, with a mixture of trepidation and hope, confronted my mother once more. We met in a local cafe, a place where we could relay the unspoken words over warm cups of coffee. I took a breath, recognizing the fragility of our interaction, and nervously explained, "I want to share this love with my children but fear for their emotional health." To my surprise, she opened up, acknowledging her past mistakes, and in that moment of vulnerability, I could see her as a flawed human being rather than the formidable figure I had cast her as for so long. We talked for 3 hours, our words weaving a new understanding among the crisscross threads of hurt and love. By the time we left that cafe, we made a gentle pact. My children could call her whatever felt right, but curiosity would remain the guide. If my mother's affection strayed into chaos, I would be there to help them navigate through the tumult, lifting them back onto their feet when the light dimmed. It was a delicate balance, but so long as we kept communication coherent, there was a glimmer of hope for a new chapter. Months later, my kids call her Grandma, Honey, and sometimes even Grandma Honey on whimsical days. It brings a smile to my face, a small triumph of compromise over conflict. Reflection has carved deeper insights into my soul, and if I've learned anything from this saga of boundaries, it's that relationships thrive where understanding flourishes, even from the pains of our past. As I gaze at my mother with a heart filled with tenderness rather than resentment, I remind myself that although nobody is perfect, the love we share can still bridge the gaping chasms left behind by misunderstandings. I've become the guardian of my children's choices, but in opening the door just a crack, I've also invited my mother into a more stable chapter of our lives, one where love doesn't have to be earned or lost, only shared. Our evenings began to take on a new rhythm, one where laughter resonated through our home in a different way. The clinking of dinner plates mingled with soft conversations, and during those times, I watched my mother transform before my eyes. The rigid demeanor she wore like a shield slowly melted away, revealing glimpses of the woman I remembered from my childhood, the one who would spin fantastical tales of her youth and make blueberry pancakes on Saturday mornings. Each time my children called her Honey, it felt like they were shaping their own relationship with her, possibly one built on affection rather than the fraught history I had held onto for so long. I began to understand that the term didn't erase the years of disappointment, rather, it was a step toward redefining connection, an invitation for both my mother and my kids to forge a bond that could empower them all. It wasn't easy. I still felt pangs of concern whenever my mother slipped into old habits, her sharp tongue ready to cut down any misstep with a quip that could sting. One evening, as my daughter, Lily, baked cookies with my mother, I caught a glimpse of their interaction from the kitchen doorway. My mother had an apron tied around her waist, flour dusting her cheek as she helped Lily roll out the dough. They giggled so genuinely that it made my heart swell, but almost immediately, a familiar icy apprehension chilled my joy. Had I truly invited someone who had disappointed me in the past into my children's sacred spaces? But as I sat watching, I realized that this was my mother trying to change, to fit into a narrative that no longer centered on her past failures but on the potential for love and acceptance. That realization sparked something in me, an acceptance that some relationships are worth bending rules for. Gradually, I found myself loosening the tight grip I had on my judgment, allowing myself to witness moments that reminded me of the shared humanity between us. One rainy Saturday, my mother and I sat on the porch while the kids splashed in puddles, the sound of their laughter muffled by the patter of raindrops on the roof. We exchanged small talk, and when I brought up her choices in the past, she surprised me with an unexpected openness. "I know I messed up," she said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I didn't have the tools or the knowledge then. I want to learn, not just for myself, but for them. For you." I was taken aback. The recognition of her shortcomings was something I had longed to hear, yet it felt surreal to finally take a step together in something resembling vulnerability. There was no dramatic confession, just a genuine attempt to connect over our shared history. I felt a lightness in my chest, a whisper of hope that perhaps we could build something stronger together. A week later, while we picnicked in the park, Lily climbed into my mother's lap, looking up at her with awe. "Honey," she called sweetly, "can you tell us about the time you met the runaway dog?" My mother's eyes sparkled at the thought, and as she started to weave a story filled with charm and whimsy, I noticed the children were completely engaged, hanging on to each word and all the playful embellishments. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel the urge to guard the children from their grandmother. I realized I was letting go of the fear that had gripped my heart for years. I smiled, absorbing the moment, where laughter echoed through trees swaying gently in the summer breeze, and I began to see the foundation of a relationship being built right before my eyes. It was with a sense of cautious optimism that I concluded this journey. The path to evolving our relationship was not without bumps. We often still navigated through the minefield of miscommunication and unspoken grievances. Nevertheless, I held on to the belief that building trust took time and that love could flourish amongst the fragile roots of our shared past. Days turned into weeks, and the more I witnessed my children's genuine affection for my mother, the deeper my resolve grew to encourage it. Sure, we faced setbacks along the way, old habits die hard, and sometimes my mother would slip back into sarcasm or dismissive remarks. But I could intervene, guiding her tone or redirecting the emphasis in our conversations without that ever-present burden of guilt. As the seasons shifted, so did our family dynamic. Thanksgiving rolled around, and as we gathered around the table, Lily took it upon herself to have everyone share what they were thankful for. When it was my mother's turn, she looked at the room full of grateful eyes, and with a quivering voice, she said, "I'm thankful for second chances, for a family that could forgive and, more importantly, for the love that connects us even when we have the past whispering in our ears." In that moment, my heart swelled, a quiet comfort settling in, as I recognized that perhaps the new chapter we were all seeking wasn't just about rebuilding what was lost but also about discovering new facets of each other. Watching my children engaging with their grandmother, embracing her as honey, taught me that healing takes time and that love is a tapestry woven from acceptance and understanding. I realized I'd become less the guardian of their choices and more a nurturer of their relationships, guiding them through the fragile landscapes of familial dynamics with newfound wisdom. And as I reflected on the journey we shared, smiling at the laughter resonating between the walls of our home, I felt a sense of peace. Healing and connections are not linear paths, they are messy, intricate, and absolutely worth every twist and turn. In the months following, we continued to foster this merging of families, keeping communication open and embracing one another's imperfections. Life hadn't magically transformed overnight, but we had discovered ways to create a rhythm that celebrated our unique individualities. I dared to believe that, while relationships are complex, they are also transformative. Each time I caught my children calling my mother honey, I would smile softly, knowing that they are building bridges that I had once thought irreparable. In doing so, we were not just healing old wounds but laying the groundwork for a beautifully intricate tapestry of love that could stretch across generations. As we moved further into this new chapter, I watched my children blossom in the forgiving warmth of their grandmother's embrace. It was a subtly beautiful transformation. At times, I would overhear them whispering secrets to her, their laughter mingling with the rustling leaves outside our window, painting a picture that felt rich and vibrant. It was a far cry from the tense atmosphere we used to have, filled with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. Instead, there was a lightness in the air, a tangible ease that swept through our home like a gentle breeze. My mother began to impress upon them the same stories that once wove the fabric of my own childhood, tales of adventure and mischief shared with my siblings that transformed even the simplest moments into cherished memories. I could see it in her eyes. Each mention of honey from my kids was a reminder that she could still be a good grandmother, that love could be expressed in many ways, and that forgiveness was not the absence of past hurts but the acceptance of them. It wasn't without its awkward moments, of course. There were times when I couldn't help but wince, memories of her difficult past rushing back like an unwelcome tide. But then I would remind myself that everyone is just a story waiting to be rewritten, and change, however small, deserves to be celebrated, even if it takes time to feel whole. One particularly serene afternoon, we gather in the living room, the sun pouring warmth through the windows, casting a golden hue on the walls. My children are sprawled on the floor, building a tower of blocks that seems to teeter precariously, while my mother sits nearby sipping her tea, her laughter ringing like the clinking of wind chimes. I glance at her, noticing how gently she guides their hands, offering suggestions instead of commands. "If we put this one here," she says with a smile, "it's going to topple less." I remember how, in my youth, her words often felt heavy, but now they dance lightly around the room, filled with affection. In that moment, I see the lessons unfolding, the ways in which they are teaching her patience just as much as she is teaching them about creativity and balance. It dawned on me that this new dynamic wasn't solely an opportunity for my children to connect with their grandmother but was healing me too, reshaping the broken pieces of our relationship into something sturdy and dependable. I allowed myself to breathe deeply, relishing the moment, when suddenly my daughter, engrossed in her building project, turned to my mother and casually said, "Hey, honey, can you help?" The word slipped out with the familiarity of an everyday phrase, and I could see the way my mother's eyes sparkled with joy, startled and delighted all at once. There was no hesitation in her smile, it was genuine and pure. "Of course, sweetheart," she replied, scooting closer to help. A warmth unfurled inside me, and for the first time, I didn't flinch on hearing that name float from their lips. Instead, I recognized it as a marker of progress, a gentle reminder that my mother was patching the wounds of her past, stitching herself into our lives, and that I was finally letting go of some of mine. As days turned into weeks, I found that the small things began to shift. Our collective laughter echoed more freely, the unturned corner of my maternal heart felt lighter, and those earlier fears that had once held me captive began to dissolve like mist under the sun. I watched my mother slip more easily into her role, her hesitations fading with each visit. The kids grew more confident in their affection, using names of endearment that bounced off the walls and wrapped around us like a favorite blanket. Each honey became a reverberation of love and an acceptance that we were all imperfect in our ways, doing our best to stitch together the tapestry we called family. There was no grand epiphany, no fixed moment that illustrated our triumph, but rather the quiet realization that connection can flicker ignited even in seemingly insurmountable darkness through small acts of love and openness. As well as the growing comfort of understanding our shared journey, it was in these moments, simple yet profound, that I learned we had become a constellation, each star a unique point of light, interconnected by a shared history and new aspirations. And as I tucked my children into bed that night, their giggles still swirling in the air, I knew that we had turned a page in our story, one full of potential, ready to explore what it means to be a family in the truest sense. I whispered, "Good night, my loves," and as they snuggled deeper into their blankets, I couldn't help but smile, feeling the threads of our tapestry weave tighter around my heart. I closed the door softly behind me, letting the echoes of their laughter linger in the hallway, and for the first time in a long time, I felt an all-encompassing peace settle over me, a delightful realization that in the end, love always finds a way to triumph over pain.